You're listening to Draft Chaff. Coming up this week.
Yeah, and you absolutely did put it in the top of the comments.
Where did its ferns through its forms go?
They let the rat tokens die and decay into fungus.
What?
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Draft Chaff. This is episode number 177. My name is Zach. I'm one of your hosts, and joining me, as per usual, Ben Fisher. What's up, dude?
I'll be honest, a lot. There is a lot up right now. So many things.
There is a lot up.
Yeah, between the show's big Patreon relaunch and I guess a kind of full rebrand. Also, first ever exclusive early access stream and new set dropping and all this stuff, cool Patreon stuff about to happen. What's not that'd be faster to list.
Right. At this point, you're right. But speaking of things that are up, right, today is our Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Have we been pronouncing it wrong this whole time? Because we got a pronunciation guide, and the way it's spelled, it should not be pronounced Ixalan.
Yeah, maybe we've been I don't know, whitewashing this the whole time. I mean, it looks phonetically to me like it would say Ixalan, but then again, that's not the culture that it's based on, right? So I guess we should go with what's most authentic.
Well, in any case, it's our format breakdown today, and we've got some changes to the way we're approaching the format breakdown, but we'll get to that in a bit. Before we do our usual housekeeping, check out the Discord if you're not already in there. We've made some really big changes to the Discord lately, including a nice new forum channel for limited formats. So we can now kind of keep track of every limited format. We used to archive those to keep the Discord looking clean. We don't have to do that anymore. It'll stay clean anyway.
Finally.
With the new forum channels, which is fantastic.
It's so good.
We're also launching our bounty boards with this set, so get into that channel now so you can start prepping pre-release, because those bounties will be live pre-release, and that'll run all the way through until our Format for a Well episode, when we kind of say goodbye to the set. So get in there. You can compete for real prizes. We're going to be giving away booster packs for the people who come in first, second, and third in terms of points earned with the bounties that you can collect. So if you're not in the Discord, you're really missing out. Check that out. The link to that is in the episode description, as well as on our Twitter page. And if you'd like to support the show directly, you can do so on Patreon at patreon.com/draftchaffpod. Huge thanks to each and every one of our patrons who continue to support us every week. We're super grateful for all of you. And especially for those of you who stuck through the big relaunch and transition period of us kind of revamping the whole Patreon. We've got a bunch of folks who joined, which is fantastic. Thank you so much. We've got Spurlo, we've got Gregorado, we've got Dan, Chris, Brian, Sean, David, Pessimistic Corn, Max, Micah. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you for joining. All of you, because you joined in our launch window, are getting your exclusive Draft Chaff pins. And if you haven't joined yet and you want to get one of those pins, which we aren't going to sell or like give out any other time, this is the only way to get them. You have until November 15th. So if you want to join by November 15th, you'll get that pin. And we'll be discussing details on when you can receive those, and expect that and everything on the Patreon feed as well. So keep an eye over there. Other perks over there include things like our custom Draft Chaff hero stickers that we're really excited for. We're working with an artist to make those look incredible, and drafting our Draft Chaff cube. That's another one that is, Ben and I think probably we're most excited about that one. But yeah, jump over there. You can see all the details on the website there at patreon.com/draftchaffpod.
To all of our patrons, you're the coolest. And to you, listener, listening, if you want your name on that list next week, maybe pop in, give the Patreon a look. I think we've got some pretty great perks now. I'm really happy with the way this all turned out. And again, just you're the ones that helped this happen, right? And that means everything from rating it 5 stars on Spotify to telling a friend about the show to just commenting in Discord and just saying hi to us. And we love interacting with everyone. We love this community that we've developed here, and it's the best limited community out there, and we'll stand by that. So thank you, patrons, for supporting us and keeping the show going strong as it continues to grow and evolve in new and unexpected ways. I don't know. Personally, I think once our Patreon grows big enough, upping those bounty board prizes, that's going to be one of the first things that I like to see. Let's get some of the Draft Chaff merch on there. Let's put a box on there for first, let's go nuts.
Yeah, and that scales to the extent that you all support us. So thank you so much. Now, normally we would do a crack a draft type thing. We're going to skip that because we have an entire, well, we don't go through the whole set on our format breakdowns, but we have a new set to go through. So we will jump into that. If you're new to the format breakdown kind of style of episode for us, we will take a look at all the mechanics in the set, and then we will kind of dive into each of the main vectors that we see in the format. If you're not familiar with vector theory, do check out our backlog of episodes. We have quite a few of those, kind of breaking down vector theory, which is our approach to card and deck criteria, the way that we kind of evaluate cards and decks. In the past, what we've done is we've taken the signpost uncommon, that Wizards kind of puts in every set, and we've grabbed a few commons and a few uncommons of each color for that signpost. We felt that was kind of doing a disservice to you guys because not every vector in the set is well supported by that signpost, and then also sometimes by forcing ourselves to certain number of commons, certain number of uncommons, we're not really showing you exactly what the bread and butter of that vector is. So we've adjusted the way we've put the slides together and kind of showing you the cards that make the most sense to really support that particular vector. So hopefully you like it. Let us know in the Discord or by commenting on like the Spotify Q&A thing to let us know how you like this approach relative to our old approaches. But Ben, with that said, let's just dive into the mechanics, shall we?
Yeah, let's start with craft. So craft is a new one, a wacky one. We're getting Minecraft up in here right now. Craft reads, you'll craft blank, whatever the card name is, with blank, some card type or requirement. It could be craft this card with an artifact, craft this card with a creature, craft this card with an island, craft this card with a pirate, monkey, dinosaur. You can craft with anything. Then the text will read, exile this artifact, and then exile whatever the cost of exiling is, the thing you're crafting with, you control, or that thing you're crafting with, from your graveyard. Then you return this card transformed under its owner's control, craft only as a sorcery. So again, this might look like you craft one artifact with an island. That island can be under your control or an island in your graveyard. If you craft with a certain creature, that creature could be one you control or in your graveyard. Right off the bat, you would prefer this to be from your graveyard, right? Unless it's something pretty free, like an island that you just have laying around in the late game. You'd rather not lose, board presence that you've invested a card and mana into when there's incidental effects that can just put a card in your graveyard functionally for free. This does point pretty deep along the graveyard vector, because if you're trying to enable this from the battlefield, you're just going to be wasting your own resources. The best way to enable this is by self-mill or, by exploring stuff into the graveyard.
Yeah, and I'll say too, right, the cards that you typically need to craft with aren't really cards that you can get for free. Like you're not going to be able to craft with most of your like creature tokens or whatever. Like there are some cards that might enable that, but some are very specific about what you need to craft with. And so yeah, you definitely want to be trying to exploit the fact that those things have made it to the graveyard rather than blowing up your own board to make a creature slightly better. But one of the ways you can get cards in your graveyard in this format is Descend, or I should say really one of the ways that you can benefit, another way you can benefit from cards entering the graveyard is Descend. Now in this set, Descend is a mechanic that has a number attached to it, but we actually only see two of those in this set. We see Descend 4 or Descend 8, and those count the number of permanents in your graveyard. So Descend 4 will say, basically do some effect if there are 4 or more permanents in your graveyard. Descend 8 will be 8 or more, etc. We also see some variations on this. Fathomless Descent checks the number of permanents you have, and then there are a lot of cards that actually just care about you having descended, meaning any card has made it into your graveyard that turn. A little bit confusing. There's a lot going on, a lot of different kind of angles that they've kind of approached this Descend mechanic, but overall, it feels kind of intuitive. It's basically just like, did something go to your graveyard? And it has to be a card. Tokens don't count. Tokens are not cards. They do go to the graveyard technically and then get removed by state-based actions, but they are not cards. Descend explicitly says you have to have put a card in your graveyard, so a permanent card, that is. So don't get tripped up by that. Ben and I got tripped up by that when we were reviewing the set originally.
Yeah.
Thanks to Dorgan for kind of clearing that up. But yeah, it does have to be a permanent card.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of clever ways to enable this. Self-mill is an obvious one that can help you get to the pretty higher descends. I mean, descend 4 permanents in the graveyard. On average, let's say in like an average set, that will probably happen turn 5, 6, 7, just in like the average game. Now, in an average set, if you're actually trying to get stuff in the graveyard, you might trade off more often. You might want to draft Death Touchers or auras that kill creatures like Deadweight, which is actually in this set. That can help put permanents in the graveyard. Now, in this set, which has a lot of graveyard themes already, you're going to want ways to self-mill. You're going to want stuff that explores, which can put stuff into the graveyard. The stuff that puts itself into the graveyard or puts other cards into the graveyard incidentally as part of its effect. There's things that sacrifice themselves, or maybe you're even sacrificing things and putting them into the graveyard. Now, Descend 8, that's a lot. And you might be wondering, how am I going to get that much of my deck into my graveyard? The design team thought of this, and they actually took designs that would usually go on instants and sorceries, and they instead put them on artifacts or even some enchantments in this set, such that it wouldn't surprise me if there's decks with very few instants and sorceries. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to have removal spells. It's just that the removal spells might be attached to an artifact. Like one of these artifacts with Craft, it's 2 mana. It deals 5 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. I think it's a white one. Or target tapped creature, maybe. We'll talk about it later in the show for sure. That would be a good one to maybe find a way to sacrifice. That way, once it's had its good ETB, you can send it to the graveyard and it can help enable Descend if that's one of the vector components you care about. Now, this is funny, though, because this means Descend sort of has 3 vectors built into it. There's a single one that cares about maybe descending like once each turn. It doesn't care about how many things are in the graveyard. It just cares that if you descended this turn, certain cards will proc. Then you have Descend 4, which wants to hit a reasonable number of cards in the graveyard. But this deck, it doesn't have to put that much work into it. But then Descend 8 and Fathomless Descent, these get paid off by just dumping a ton of stuff into your graveyard. This deck would really want to go hard on the self-mill stuff because that would power up Descend 8 and Fathomless. Whereas Descend 4, once you meet that threshold, threshold joke, stuff in the graveyard. Once you meet that threshold of Descend 4, your stuff doesn't actually get any better if you keep milling yourself. So if you're putting cards in your deck that have some of their equity in the fact that they can mill yourself or put permanents in the graveyard, then you might be losing out on that equity on maybe their presence on the board. They might be slightly overcosted or understated or something like that. So building towards the right graveyard vector is going to be super important. It's also super complicated. And I'm very excited to use vector theory for this set. It looks perfect for it.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one seeing how that plays out and whether those different vectors kind of hurt each other in terms of figuring out what you're drafting when you're drafting. But I kind of like this approach to have different angles to the same mechanic that kind of all breed different vectors.
I think we should address Explore next. Explore is actually a returning mechanic from old Ixalan. Reveal the top card of your library. Put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, you put a 1/1 counter on the creature that triggered Explore, and then you put that card back on top or into the graveyard. Oh, that's convenient. You can put permanents into the graveyard with this, right? And then it buffs your creatures to boot. So this is sort of the hand smoothing mechanic in the set. It helps either clear away things that are not lands in the early game, helps make sure you hit your land drops in the early game. And then in the late game, it helps dig you towards more gas. And it even guarantees that you have the thing that you want. Maybe it's turn 8 and you explore a 1-drop off the top of your deck. Well, then you go, oh, wait a minute. I don't think I want this anymore. I still get a counter off of it, but then I can bin it and hope that my next card is something better. Really good mechanic, really fun to play with. I miss Jade Light Ranger. Sadly, they did not reprint Jade Light Ranger. The blue-green uncommon that we'll talk about today, it does a pretty good Wild Growth Walker impression, although it doesn't gain 3 life. So, man, I miss Wild Growth Walker. That deck was so sweet, but Explorer is still going to be pretty fun.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning, too, so far, the three mechanics we've talked about kind of all feed each other, right? Especially Explorer. Explorer can be kind of a linchpin for either the craft deck or the descend deck or both. And you can kind of like trigger your descend and then craft away cards that if you don't care about how many permanents are in your graveyard after you've already, gotten some descend trigger. And Explorer is going to be kind of a linchpin to keep all these things together.
Mm-hmm. We should mention that there's something new about Explorer, map tokens. So map tokens, you can think of them sort of like a blood token or a clue token. They read, pay 1, tap, sacrifice this, target creature you control explores. So, and activate only at sorcery speed, unfortunately. I guess that may have made combat math too unpredictable and weird. And this is obviously very good. I mean, this is sort of like, I don't know, a map token isn't a card. Sometimes you'll be able to use it as one because you can craft away this as an artifact. So sometimes a map token will be exactly what you need. Unfortunately, them hitting the graveyard does not does not trigger descend. Maybe that would have just been too much for instant speed descending. So the map tokens, they're good when you have creatures on board, right? If you're playing a control deck that doesn't have a very high creature count, these are not going to be as good for you because if you don't have a creature in play, you can't actually get any value off of them. That being said, if you can draw cards off this or, continue to bin stuff in this, you could trigger descend off this, right? If you put like a creature that you reveal off this map token into the graveyard. So it's sort of like a new twist on Explore. This also gives more control over where those counters go. So maybe you can put it on a cheap flyer, of which there's a handful in this set. Little 1, 2, 3 mana flyers. More than usual, I noticed, especially at common and uncommon. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a vector that we haven't even spotted yet where it's just try to have a little 1/1 flyer explore a bunch of times and then smack your opponent.
All right, so then that leads us to Discover, which is the next new mechanic for this set. And it's kind of a buffed version of Cascade. Essentially, it says exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with mana value X or less. So it'll say Discover 4, find a mana value 4 or less, cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So it's essentially Cascade, except you don't have to cast the spell or play the card. You can just put it in your hand if you flip an instant that isn't relevant at that time. Though I will say Discover is one of the few mechanics that doesn't really play well with the others, right? It doesn't enable graveyard stuff for craft or descend. That said, I'm happy with a Cascade buff. That's cool.
Yeah, who would have thought buffed Cascade was going to be happening this year?
Not on my bingo card. Not on my bingo card.
But I do have a hypothesis, maybe a bit of a hot take even. It seems like this mechanic came last. And I think because it came last, it was tuned to match the power level of the other mechanics. This is my hypothesis. We've seen them do this with other mechanics before. I would guess that this came last after all the other ones when the design team went, okay, well, this is what Sultai does, right? What do white and red have? Because Sultai has this ridiculous value aggregation pile where blue can self-mill, black can discard, green can explore. Red and white can't really naturally put stuff in the graveyard super well. I mean, there's vectors that'll touch upon red and white that can put stuff in the graveyard. Black, red can sack. Black, white can sack. But red, white itself can't. And I think because of that, they leaned into this sort of aggressive, but also there's sort of like a tapping your own stuff subvector, tapping your own stuff even sometimes to Cascade. So we'll see where that goes. I'm interested. I'm not entirely sure where it's going to land, but I have a feeling that it's going to be similar to how Celebration was in last set. I have a feeling it's going to be distinct from the graveyard stuff.
Yeah, and it feels that way just based on how the mechanic works. But hey, anything that's giving you extra value is going to be good, and this does just that. So I'm excited to see how these cards play out. One
last thing we wanted to note. Ixalan is known for creatures, and I appear to have just butchered the name again. Ixalan, I guess we might go with. Curious to hear what people have heard about the proper pronunciations of this. Let us know in Discord. Ixalan was known for its 4 types, right? Dinosaurs, vampires, merfolk, and pirates. Notably, there's been some shifting in language. There was actually a pretty good article talking about how it was more like a press release saying that some certain mythology has been kind of butchered by modern pop culture and gaming. Rakshasa was one that came up, as well as some other cards that were eroded to better respectively reflect on the cultures from which they're drawn, right? And that's obviously a great thing. In a similar vein, there's been discussions about whether tribal is still an appropriate word to use or whether typal should be used instead. They did release a statement saying that kindred is the official Wizards language that they're going to use now, instead of like calling it a tribal deck, which I guess you could go into a deconstruction of where this came from.
They sort of did that. Typal is still an official phrase being used.
Okay.
They replaced tribal type cards. So we won't see tribal enchantment or tribal instant or whatever. It'll be kindred enchantment. The type itself has changed from tribal to kindred. Typal is still a word they're using to describe types.
I think I prefer kindred as the catch-all. I don't mind seeing it on a card. It's kind of funny. But does this mean we're getting...
Morrow put out a tweet addressing just that. He was like defining the difference between typal and tribal as it was. In response to somebody saying essentially the same thing that you just said. Kindred should just be the catch-all.
I'll probably just start calling it kindred from this point on. Typal is a little mechanical.
It's a weird word.
Yeah, I don't love it. But kindred, everyone knows what that means, right? I mean, there's even a lot of commander cards that are already templated with like kindred boon or that type of thing. So I like that. Funny though, does that mean eventually we would get what was previously known as a tribal instant or tribal sorcery? Are we going to see kindred instants and kindred sorceries in Bloomburrow? Maybe we're going to get some mouse sorceries, or who knows? That could be cool. Also, another cool thing about this set, in addition to seeing those existing types, it sounds like there won't be. Well, let's try this out. Kindred decks so much. Dinosaurs have a kindred theme. There's some merfolk payoffs at higher rarities. Some vampire ones as well, but there's not quite as much as there was last set. There are a couple cool new creature types in the set, though. Capybara, llama, and snail have all been officially now ushered in. Oh, by the way, there's also one new deciduous, I think they're calling it. It's not quite evergreen, but something you can expect to see come up in future sets without much of an explanation, and that's finality counters. And they do exactly what you'd expect them to do. It reads, if a creature with a finality counter on it would die, exile it instead. So it's not quite when it leaves the battlefield from anywhere, it gets exiled. You can still bounce it to your hand and rebuy it back. Like that's the type of thing if you're doing some sort of broken combo. But I think there's 5-ish cards in the set that refer to a finality counter. Just know that going forward, those will probably come up again.
All right, that does it on the mechanics. Let's just dive into the vectors that we want to kind of chat through. We are still going to talk about each of the vector signposts, and then we'll talk through cards, again, not so specifically like a set number of commons and a set number of uncommons in each color, but just more which pieces will be the supporting roles for this vector and kind of move you into this vector direction while you're drafting.
Mm-hmm. Now, just as a general refresher, remember cards and decks, they have directions and strengths. So when we're referring to the cards vectors, keep in mind that many of these have multiple uses, right? We're just trying to see where do these cards fit best. I mean, ultimately, vector theory is inspired by the idea that every card can be good at certain times. And we've just done our best to see, okay, for these vectors that they're supposedly putting in the set, right? We kind of work off the base assumption that because there's a red-white uncommon that's a legend and all that, we're assuming that there's like a red-white deck built around this card. We're kind of working off this model as, okay, let's see what this vector has to offer. Let's see what supports it. And sometimes in a set, it ends up being not much, right? Think of, blue-white from last set, where there was a lot of stuff there, but it just kind of sucked. Or blue-green, which had some solid cards, but there wasn't a super tight vector. It was just cast 5-mana stuff. So let's see what these vectors look like. By the way...
And the hope is that we'll catch certain things like maybe blue-white from last set, where the tap theme, which is what we thought that vector, that color pair's vector direction was trying to do, wasn't really. Instead, it was like this mid-range kind of value deck. Hopefully, this new sort of approach to the way we lay out these format breakdowns will help us catch some of those things a little bit quicker.
I highly recommend watching this portion. If you're on Spotify, you can look at the Spotify video. It's pretty cool if you have it up in a tab. You can see it kind of off on the side there. Or if you're watching on YouTube, this is probably the best place to see this because, man, I cleaned up these slides and they look nice. Look at Gishath with our logo splatted over her face there. So let's start here with blue-white, right? Getting crafty, as we've deemed it. So in blue-white, we've got Master's Guide Mural. This is 3 white-blue. It's an artifact. All these are going to be uncommons. When Master's Guide Mural enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token. 5 mana artifact ETBs to make a 4/4 token. Okay, fine. Nice that it's a permanent, although I guess any 5 mana 4/4 would be a permanent as a creature too.
Well, it's technically 2 permanents.
Oh, that's true. Although that token, it's not going to do much for you descend wise.
That's true.
This also has craft with artifact. It has a cost 4 white, blue. So you need to then exile this card and an artifact from either the battlefield or from your graveyard. Ideally, your graveyard, right? And then it flips into Master's Manufactory artifact. It's white and blue on the back too. It's got one of those little reminder bubbles. It says tap, create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token. Activate only if Master's Manufactory or another artifact enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So you get one right off the bat. And then any turn in which you can create an artifact, you get to make a 4/4. That's a lot of repeatable value.
Sure is.
There's no activation cost on that. You're not paying. This is the type of inevitability where if my opponent lands this, I'm like, I need something. I need to cheese out a win right now. Like I need a spell that, somehow taps down all their stuff or makes my thing fly or destroys all artifacts for the rare cases that it'll have that. Or destroying this even isn't that effective if they made 2 or 3 4/4s off of it. This basically says you have to answer me or win the game before I flip, because if I do and my deck is properly built around it, you're just going to be churning out artifacts.
Yeah, and this card's kind of nice because it is its own little insular package, right? It is a 3 white blue, so 5 mana 4/4, but then craft with artifact, if that 4/4 is still around, you can use it to enable the craft ability here. And then that essentially becomes 7 mana, make a 4/4, but then you can repeat that every turn. Because you can make the 4/4 the turn you craft. So in a way, you're getting the craft for free if you use the golem that it ETBs with in the first place.
This is a really interesting vector for blue-white to have. Think of blue-white knights, right? Back a couple sets ago in March. Blue-white knights was not interested in paying 7 mana for an activated ability. But that deck wanted to just get in, smack face, and win the game. Now we see a very different take on blue-white. This is clearly a reactive vector. In order to enable this, you're going to want cards that either slow down your opponent, stabilize yourself, or guarantee that you're going to make it to the late game and your opponent won't be ahead on board at that point. So some things that we thought kind of irrelevant here. Lodestone Needle is our first card up. One of the blue artifact. It's an uncommon. Man, these set symbols.
We're going to be doing that a lot this episode.
Yes, we are. It has flash. So 2 mana artifact with flash. When it enters the battlefield, tap up to 1 target artifact or a creature and put 2 stun counters on it. So that locks it down for a pretty good amount of time. It's still flash it in, tap something down for a bit. And then it has craft with artifact. And the activation cost is 2 and a blue. It flips into Guidestone Compass. It's an artifact on the back. It says, pay 1, tap, target creature you control explores. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, if you want to make sure you're hitting your land drops and getting up to that 7 mana point, here's one, right?
Yeah.
Plus, these other flip ones, these would count as 2 artifacts entering the battlefield. So you could play Lodestone Needle 1 turn, activate the Foundry, or not Foundry, Manufactory, right? And then the next turn, flip into Guidestone Compass, activate the Manufactory again. These flip artifacts work perfectly with this.
Yeah, they really do. And Lodestone Needle is a nice little case. If you've already managed to flip the Manufactory or flip into the Manufactory, it has flash. So you can sequence your artifacts such that you'd be able to make a 4/4 on your opponent's turn as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
instant speed.
Yeah, that's pretty great because the Manufactory doesn't require you to tap at sorcery speed.
It does not.
You just need to be able to play an artifact on your opponent's turn. So
There's a way to do it.
Yeah, Lodestone Needle's a nice way to do that. And then, yeah, it has the map effect, the pay one tap target creature explorers. That's going to be nice. And it's going to kind of help with the little theme of Lodestone Needle here, slowing your opponent down, giving you time to protect yourself, all those different aspects. And then, like Ben mentioned, of course, being able to make sure you hit those land drops so you can flip the Manufactory if you're playing this earlier.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, exploring can help you put more artifacts into the graveyard to craft stuff with Lodestone Needle or with the Manufactory. Next up, we've got Inverted Iceberg. 1 of the blue, artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you mill a card, then draw a card. Cute. This is a common. Nice little glue piece here. This helps put stuff in the graveyard. Maybe you mill an artifact or a permanent. Maybe you have some sort of descended stuff going on too. We're already starting to see these are very vector specific. Like there are certain blue decks that just would not want to do this. You have to be a very specific artifact deck trying to do this, and I think blue-white is the place. This has Craft with Artifact for 4 blue. It flips into Iceberg Titan, which is a 6/6 blue golem. It's also an artifact creature. Whenever Iceberg Titan attacks, you may tap or untap target artifact or creature. Little Frost Titan thing. It doesn't lock it down for a turn. It doesn't put a stun counter or anything. But this does make sure it's going to get in for some clean hits. This is, again, another win condition for this deck. So maybe you're not lucky enough to get one of the Manufactories. This is another way this deck could win, right?
This is another card that plays really well with the Manufactory too, because the goal, when you craft, you're exiling the card, so it does ETB, and then you can, in response, tap your Manufactory, right? While maybe the attack triggers on the stack or something, tap your Manufactory to make a 4/4, then untap your Manufactory with the Iceberg Titan, tap it again, make a second 4/4. Oh my god! It's just a nice little combo there.
You can untap the Manufactory. That's so sick. Yeah, I didn't even notice that. That's awesome. Now, here's a card that I'm probably most excited for in the entire set. Mischievous Pup. 2 and a white. It's a dog. It's a common. No, it's an uncommon. Come on. Why can't that have been a common? It is Flash. I know why it couldn't have been a common, because it would have been busted. When Mischievous Pup enters the battlefield, return up to 1 other target permanent you control to its owner's hand. So let's say you've played Lodestone Needle already. You flash in the pup. You bounce the needle back to your hand. Maybe you'd already flipped it into the Guidestone Compass. Who cares? You bounce it back to your hand. You recast it on their combat, tapping down another thing. Then you activate your Manufactory again. Or maybe that's the one you need to flip the Manufactory. Like the things that pup allows, this whole vector is built around cards, artifacts, permanents, with good ETBs, and then things that flip into other good ETBs. It's just like 2 good ETBs stapled to each other. Mischievous Pup can help you rebuy that. That's it.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
This even works well with the Master's Guide mural, the front side. You just pick up the mural again, and you get another 4 for the next turn. It's sick. Now, here's what I think people are going to be fighting over. Market Gnome. White for an 0/3 artifact creature. It's a gnome at uncommon. When it dies, you gain a life and draw a card. When it's exiled from the battlefield while you're activating a craft ability, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So this is one that actually doesn't mind being exiled from the battlefield itself, because it's paid off pretty well. A 1-mana 0/3 can soak up some early game damage. I mean, this deck clearly wants to go into late game. And even just letting this thing die, trade off, put it in front of a 4/4, let it go to the graveyard, boom, you get a card and the life off of it. There's no way this card doesn't like end with you getting a life and drawing a card, right?
Pretty much, yeah, unless somehow someone wants to spend an actual exile effect on your 1-mana 0/3.
Yeah, and if you self-mill it, then you don't feel too bad either, because it's, again, a 1-mana 0/3. Lastly here, I'd like to give an example of how we're doing our format breakdowns a little differently now. Looking at it more in terms of vectors. Tithing Blade. This is a black card, but we believe that it fits perfectly within this blue-white vector. Now, you can take that how you will. Does that mean an Esper deck will emerge in the format? Not necessarily. It might mean that you might wind up with a blue-black deck that has a lot of these cards, maybe Lodestone Needle, Inverted Iceberg, and Tithing Blade, and this forms a vector within your deck of, I'm trying to have these artifacts with good ETBs and ways to recur them, ways to pick them up, ways to get them back from the graveyard. Maybe you splash for Master's Guide Myrtle in a blue-black deck because you're trying to adhere to your deck's game plan to its vector. Tithing Blade reads 1 of the black. It's an artifact. This is a common. As it enters the battlefield, or sorry, because this can be responded to. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. 2 mana artifact edict. Boom. So cool.
Yeah, this is an example of the type of card that typically would be a sorcery that just got stapled to an artifact.
Yeah, exactly. It has craft with creature, 4 and a black. It flips into Consuming Sepulcher, which is an artifact, and it says, at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I don't even care about that side too much. I mean, that side is just icing on the cake. If you have 5 mana and you'll have a you'll have a creature in the graveyard, right? That'll be easy to do. If you have 5 mana and the time and a creature in the graveyard, you can flip it into the Sepulcher, and then, I mean, it's not like it was doing anything else. Though this is one that you wouldn't mind exiling for a different craft ability, right? Because that right. Edict effect is what's most important here. So I see Tithing Blade. I mean, look at Tithing Blade and Mischievous Pup, right? You Tithing Blade turn 2, they sack their thing. Turn 3, you flash and Pup, pick the blade back up. Turn 4, Tithing Blade, they sack again, and then you have 2 open mana to do something else. It's just a really cool, grindy value engine. So again, that could be a black-white deck that plays along this vector. We're trying to approach this with the vector idea in mind. Some of these vectors, red-green coming up, it's just dinosaurs, nothing too complicated. But the reason we felt we wanted to make this change from previous format breakdowns, DMU was a bit of an inspiration. Think of Domain, right? You can't analyze Domain by looking at the conventional 2-color pairs and just thinking, yeah, blue-green is going to be a blue-green deck. That wouldn't have made any sense. Had we been doing it this way, we would have been looking more closely at what cards would have paired well with a blue-green vector that wants to go into the late game, wants to be reactive. I think we would have found, Lightning Strike works really well with this. Cards that affect, destroy evil even. Cards that can are cheap, you can spend them early, and can interact with your opponent. We've done something similar here. And definitely let us know in Discord what you think of this new approach.
Yeah, and I will say too, right, if we're looking at this from that perspective, the other goal is we want to show which cards are really supporting these vectors. And sometimes that might mean that, technically the signpost is red-green, but it's really only supported by red cards. And so you may end up with like close to a mono red deck that's splashing green for the uncommon or whatever. Mm-hmm. That said, every card we have here in blue and white is an uncommon. So I'm a little nervous about the viability, or actually was Inverted Iceberg a common? I don't remember.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we had one common there in blue and white. And I don't know that necessarily means that this deck will be actually really difficult to put together, but it does seem to point to the linchpin pieces being difficult to find. And that may mean you have to put a little more work into making this. You may have to get crafty with this one. You may have to put a little more work into figuring out how to make this vector tick, but I'll be interested to see how these decks come together. So with that, on to blue black. Ukben back from the dead. Ben, you got really clever with these names here.
Thank you.
And I totally butchered the pronunciation of this word, but I'm gonna say it the way I say it now, and then you guys can roast me and in the Discord because I mispronounced it. Ukbenbak, the Great Mistake, 3 blue black for legendary skeleton horror, of course uncommon. It's a 6/4 vigilance menace, so 5 mana 6/4 vigilance menace. Already quite good. And then it has descend 8. You pay 4 blue black. So if you have 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, then you can activate this ability, paying 4 blue black. Return Ukbenbak, the Great Mistake, from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Activate only if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, and only as a sorcery. Nice. Yeah, you get to rebuy your 6/4 Vigilance Menace. That's pretty sweet. Not really an effect we see too often on a blue-black card, but I guess Vigilance anyway.
Vigilance is like secondary or tertiary in blue, I guess, and Menace is black. So this reminds me of that whole a 5 mana 4/4 flying Vigilance. What colors is that most likely to be? And design wise, the correct answer is black green. I get it for the record. This one I'm interested with. I mean, Descend 8. That's a lot. You have to put in a lot of effort for that. So I guess the question is, do you up front want that 5 mana 6/4 Vigilance Menace? I'd say probably. Yeah, I don't think a blue-black deck would ever really cut that. I mean, that's just a pretty solid rate. And then it has this upside. It's a little slow, right? I mean, some of these are going to be cards that just cost one of each of their colors, right? Back to red-green. The red-green one just costs red-green. And then it's even more flexible than that. This one's a little slow. And then Descend 8 is very slow. That's going to take some real work to enable. I mean, even if you self-mill this, if you're at 7, this still does nothing from your graveyard. I almost see this as maybe a cool splash card if there ends up being like a Sultai, all in, mill every single thing in my deck and hope I can win before I die. And you just like self-mill all of it. And then Ukvin Bakir eventually like, I don't know. This card acts almost as a fixed, limited, prized amalgam where it's just going to come back from the graveyard at some point because you know you're self-milling so much.
Yeah, I think this vector is going to turn out to be Descend Matters, meaning like get permanent cards in your graveyard, but we're probably going to see this be really closer to like a Descend 5 or 6 deck, even though there aren't cards that trigger just like off of Descend 5 and Descend 6. You're probably going to end up on most games having 5 or 6 permanent cards in your graveyard, unless you build your deck in a more controlling way that enables you to survive long enough to get 8 cards. Also, I just looked up the pronunciation. It's Uchbenback. But let's move on here. So next up, we've got Screaming Phantom. This is 2 and a black for a spirit at common. It's a 2/2. So 3 mana 2/2. It has flying. And whenever it attacks, mill a card. So nice little enabler here for the Descend. Of course, if you manage to not hit a permanent, it's not really helping you there. But if you are putting this in your deck, you're likely crafting the deck such that you are going to have more permanence. And again, as Ben mentioned earlier, a lot of the effects we would otherwise see on non-permanent cards have been kind of ported into permanence via artifacts. So may not be a problem we've run into too much in the set, but that is something to consider when you're playing cards like Screaming Phantom.
You already know I'm going to make a deck with 0 instants and sorceries, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
In fact, I've been waiting for a set where I don't have to play any instants and sorceries.
This sounds like it could be the one. Next up, we've got Echo of Dusk. This is 1 and a black for a 2/2 vampire spirit at common. It has Descend 4. As long as there are 4 more permanent cards in your graveyard, Echo of Dusk gets +1/+1 and has lifelink.
Sweet. And this one is one that you can enable pretty early. And then obviously this is just a bear, but once it has that, 1/1 and lifelink, this is a real ground threat. And it helps you stabilize too, right? A 3/3 lifelink is a real solid body.
Yeah, we'll have to see how quickly you can hit the Descend 4. I think, if you're not hitting that until turn 5 or 6, then like sure, the 3/3 lifelink is a real card, but like it's outclassed by most things by that point. So we'll have to see how early you can turn this on. I think if you can get it by turn maybe 5, you're probably feeling pretty good.
It also can just trade off.
That too. Next up, Eaten by Piranhas. This is 1 and a blue for an enchantment aura at uncommon. It has flash, and it says enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a black skeleton creature with base power and toughness 1/1. So nice little like Frogify-ish effect. But yeah.
I literally just realized this is an uncommon. This has been a common in my head the entire time. And I was very excited because I thought, this is obviously Blue's one of its top commons because, in fact, I may have actually put it in Blue's top commons. Can we check on that real quick? This card's great. What I really like about this is that it's a permanent. It's an aura, right? And the joke is that if you flash this in mid-combat, it helps. Let's say you've got a 3/3 and a 3/3 that are about to trade. You flash this in on their 3/3. It's functionally like a -2/-2 instant. And then this thing ends up going to the graveyard, and then this adds to your count for Descend, right? So this is a nice one. It's a removal spell. It goes to the graveyard. Is it the blue Doomblade? I don't know, but it's kind of close to that. Also, this can shrink anything down to a 1/1. Notably, this is base power, so if a card has a bunch of counters on it from Explorer, you may not want to put this on it because, you might just make it like a little bit worse, but not actually that much worse. This will lock down like a big dinosaur or something pretty effectively, though.
Yeah, and you absolutely did put it in the top blue comments.
All right. Let's fix that later. What's next?
Next up, we've got a Raska Puzzle Door. I'm probably butchering all the pronunciations. Apologies to everybody. It's 1 blue mana for an artifact at common and has an ability: pay 1, tap, sack it. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of those cards in your hand and the other into your graveyard. So we've seen this effect a bunch. Usually it's on an instant or a sorcery of some kind. And here we get it on an artifact.
Yeah, this is great. This will put at least one card, one permanent into your graveyard because it puts itself there, right? And then probably another one because you can be specific about what you take. This puts probably like 1 2/3 permanence into the graveyard just by itself. This also pairs pretty well with craft, not on the battlefield, but from the graveyard. Also, when I said pairs pretty well with craft, I thought mac and cheese. And I was immediately thinking, what wine would pair well with craft? Let us know in Discord.
Oh my goodness.
What's a nice pairing with craft? But yeah, this obviously pairs very well with craft. This can put other stuff in the graveyard too. Maybe you're looking for a certain creature type to craft with something that you have already on the battlefield. You could put that in the graveyard off of this and get other value to your hand. So a nice little flexible kind of glue piece for this deck. All right, up next, we've got Zoyoa Lava Tongue, red and a black for a 2/2 Goblin Warlock. It's a legend. It's got Death Touch. I'm kind of good. 2 mana 2/2 legendary Death Toucher, but it does more. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Zoyoa Lava Tongue deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't. And it reminds you to send the permanent you was put in the graveyard. Okay. We're calling this Punishing Descent. This is a pretty cool vector. This is sort of what we mentioned earlier about how the different descending vectors all point in slightly different directions. So this one seems to point in the direction of you just need to have descended this turn. It doesn't care how many times you've descended. You don't have to hit descend 4, descend 8, or fathomless descent. This just wants you to do it like once a turn. It's too bad because treasures would have been a really cool way to do this. If you could just sack a treasure every turn to descend, but I guess that would have been a little too good. All right, let's see what vector stuff is going to enable descending once a turn. First up, we've got Enterprising Scallywag. One in a red for a 2/2 Goblin Pirate at uncommon. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, create a treasure token. Nice.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, again, too bad treasures don't enable descend because then you could just get one every turn, and it almost seems like that's how the card should work. But you know, I didn't design the card. Anyway, no, this card's good. Treasures are great for a lot of reasons. Clearly, the set cares about artifacts. You can craft with a treasure. That's a pretty good way to get a free way to craft with something. Don't even bother having to exile something from your graveyard when you just have a treasure sitting on the battlefield. You're not doing anything with it. Treasures also help you splash, right? Maybe we could talk about how white cards, white sacrifice outlets, particularly from the black-white vector. There's a mono-white card that lets you sack stuff. There's a black-white card that lets you sack stuff. That can pair pretty well with this vector as well. Although those sometimes you want to sack multiple times a turn, which is why we didn't actually put them on here. But in a pinch, you could probably play one of those. Next up, Bitter Triumph. 1 in a black, instant. It's an uncommon. It has, as an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card or pay 3 life. And it says destroy target creature or planeswalker. 2 mana, destroy target creature or planeswalker, pay 3 life. This would be like a first pick level card in literally any format. And then it has the upside of letting you discard a card. Now, you're not doing madness stuff, but you can probably find like a spare land in hand or something you don't really care about, maybe even an artifact or something that you want to reanimate. Discarding a card from your hand does count as descending. So if you discarded a land, that would trigger Zoyoa and it would proc the effect.
This is another one that's actually quite nice if you think about how the blue-white vector, quote unquote, was also kind of looking like it could take an Esper spin, because this would let you sacrifice artifacts or discard artifacts rather that you know you can get value out of later by crafting with them. And blue-white seems to be, in terms of crafting, seems to be the color pair that cares about crafting with artifacts as opposed to other creature types or other card types. And Bitter Triumph may be another way to just, hey, I don't really want to lose the life right now because I'm playing against this aggressive deck and I need to kind of keep myself alive, but I have this artifact that I would like to get some extra value out of. Don't feel great about discarding it, but hey, at least I know I can get some extra value out of it later and use it to craft with one of my other creatures.
And then it's also putting a permanent in the graveyard, which maybe if you do have Descend 4 cards in your deck, I don't think Red-Black would ever put a Descend 8 card in its deck. I think that'd be very off vector, as you could say, because this deck can't really enable that, right? The treasures, look at Enterprising Scallywag. Part of the value of this card is in its treasure creation, not in its putting permanents in the graveyard. Whereas if you go back to Blue-Black, we saw cards that could, self-mill a bunch and get paid off for that. Here's a good one for Red-Black to put in the graveyard. Greedy Freebooter. Black for a 1/1 human pirate. This is a common. When it dies, scry 1 and create a treasure. Nice. Little package.
Pretty good.
Yeah. I think Black-White will fight Red-Black for this card because it's good sacrifice fodder for either deck, and Black does have a bit of a sacrifice theme going on here. So this will be good in multiple vectors.
This just does a whole lot for a 1 mana card, right? It's a body on the board that lets you stem some bleeding. It dies into a scry and a treasure. It also puts a permanent in your graveyard. Like, it's just doing a whole lot of stuff, and I love to see that in a 1 mana common.
Yeah. And again, with the complexity, like, we have Scry and Explorer and Surveil in the same set. That's
ooh, yeah.
I don't know if I'd start someone on this one, but I'm personally loving it so far. Also, think about this. Like, you've got a 2/1. Your opponent plays this. You're never attacking into it ever.
No.
So this can be a deceptive way to slow down the game a little bit, even though it is a 1-drop. It's a 1-drop that you want to die, right? And you want to get the value from it later. Couple more here. Canonized in Blood is one of the black. It's an enchantment at uncommon. And it says, at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So this is the deck for that, right? This is the vector where this seems to be best. A deck that cares about descending exactly 1 time each turn. You don't want to sack your whole board, right? You don't want to discard your whole hand. You want to pitch exactly 1 thing, you get this effect. But then we're not done. It has an activated ability, 5 black, sacrifice it, create a 4/3 white and black vampire creature token with flying. That's a pretty solid late game threat, right? A 4/3 flyer. 4-power flyers are no joke. And this is going to be building up your board and hopefully stabilizing you so that you do have time to eventually pay that 7 and get there.
Yeah, also, in this deck, it's probably going to be relevant, but it does itself enable Descend when you're activating that ability because it is a permanent that you're putting into the graveyard. So it will trigger all your other at the beginning of your end step if you descended effects.
Yeah, so it kind of never lets you run out of the gas. Either this is triggering off other things descending, or you can just sack this and descend. Last one here, Brood Rage Mycoid. 3 and a black for a 4/3 fungus at common. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, create a 1/1 black fungus creature token with this creature can't block. Oh, so it's just a rat. Again. Okay. A format of 4/3 that can pump out a bunch of 1/1s. Those 1/1s are creatures that you can sack, not to descend or anything, but you can sacrifice them because there are vectors within black-red and black-white that care about this. Mardu is kind of like a big pairing in this set between black-red and black-white. Black maybe seems to have this if you descended clause pretty commonly.
Yeah, so we kind of looked at these in terms of payoffs payoffs and enablers, right? And we talk about these in most sets because it's a very pivotal part of design. But at their worst, right, Canonized in Blood is a 2 mana do nothing. It just doesn't do anything until you have it 7 mana, which is a real cost. Having a card in your deck that doesn't do anything on turn 2 is quite relevant. And in most cases, I think if you play this on 2, you're not going to trigger Descend the turn you play it. So that's something to think about. It is an uncommon, which tells me that it probably is more powerful than I'm originally thinking because it doesn't sound very good to me. And then again, similarly, like Brood Rage Mycoid is a 4 mana 4/3. If you can't trigger Descend, that's it. It's just a 4 mana 4/3. So there is a little bit of, these are types of cards that you have to when you're evaluating them, you really need to look at the context of what you're doing. If your deck is looking like it can do a ton of descend stuff, and I should say a ton meaning you can do it reliably, not that you're descending a bunch every turn.
Yeah.
These cards go up in terms of their power level. If you can't, they go down. And then their floor is essentially that you can't trigger descend at all. And so you can evaluate the cards differently in those contexts. Next up, another name I'm going to totally butcher.
You're getting all the hard ones.
It's Quinth, I think. Firstborn of Gishath. This is red-green for a 2/3 dino at uncommon. It has haste, so 2 mana 2/3 haste. Pretty good. I think we could probably just stop there.
Yep, I'm done.
But we're not. When it's Quinth, Firstborn of Gishath enters the battlefield, you may pay 2. When you do, target dinosaur you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. Okay, so just 4 mana 2/3 force something to bite something else. That's just great.
Wow, I only have one question. Where did its ferns through its forns go?
Oh no.
Yeah, anyway, happy that Gishath had a kid, I think. I'm pretty sure that's the actual lore here. I mean, firstborn of and it's Quint. Wait a minute. They're pulling a fast one on us. No, this card's obviously awesome. I mean, just a 2 mana 2/3 haste, I'm done. But the fact that this is a 4 mana, basically a flame tongue Kavu. I mean, what was that? Was it Twin Shot Sniper from a couple sets ago? The 4 mana, 3 in a red, 2/3 ETB, deal 2 to any target. I think it had reach and you could channel it to just pitch to deal 2. This is obviously a little different. It's a bit better on the front half where you get a 2 mana 2/3 haste. But then, I mean, at base for 4, this is going to be able to bite something itself. But if you play this in the late game and you have like a 5 power dino, then that thing gets to bite. So really, really great card. Any dinosaurs deck is happy to play this. And this does point towards a dinosaurs vector.
Yeah, and I actually glossed right over that. I personally didn't even recognize that I kind of just assumed it said target, like another target dinosaur. It does let itself bite. So yeah, you could pick off a 2 toughness creature if you play this on 4. Just a really solid little card that you can, I like these cards being so flexible. You can play them early, you can play them late, and it scales well with the game because even though it's just a 2/3, if you've got a 6/6 dino on the board, well, you're eating something big anyway. All right, so next up, we've got Armored Kincaller. This is 2 and a green for a 3/3 at common. When it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a dinosaur card from your hand. If you do, or if you control another dinosaur, you gain 3 life. Wow, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, there's a lot of dinosaurs in green especially. This vector, again, I mean, nothing to do with the graveyard on this card at all. Nope. If you put this in a deck where you're trying to do green graveyard stuff, or green-black graveyard stuff even, you might not have a great time. I mean, this wants a lot of dinosaurs, which are most present in green and red, of course. But if you can enable this card, it's obviously great, right?
Yeah, it seems pretty fantastic. I also am already getting the sense that this is going to be a more straightforward deck to draft. It's also probably going to be, in weird ways, both less and more competitive to draft. By that, I mean, you may be fighting more people for it, or you may not be, because these cards like really only fit into this one vector so far, it seems. And all the decks trying to do any of the descend stuff will kind of be fighting for descend pieces, and you'll just get handed these because they don't want these at all.
Yeah.
But then if you have any other red-green drafter at the table, you're going to be fighting over these pieces. So I'm interested to see how that kind of plays out as well, because it does seem like it would be a little bit of a simpler drafting experience to try to put this deck together. Next up, we've got Belligerent Yearling. This is 1 in red for a 3/2 dino at uncommon. It has trample, so 2 mana 3/2 trample. Whenever another dinosaur enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Belligerent Yearling's base power become equal to that creature's power until end of turn. So really quickly scales with like whatever you're playing. Of course, it still has 2 toughness, so it isn't necessarily going to survive in combat. But if you really need to push through, a few extra damage, this thing already has trample on it. So obviously that's kind of the joke here. You play like a 6/6 or whatever, it becomes a 6/2. You trample the damage over, and you win the game.
Why stop at 6? There's dinosaurs that can get much bigger than 6 in this set.
Sure are. Next up, we've got Earthshaker Dreadmaw. This is 4 green for Dino at uncommon. It's got trample. When it ETBs, draw a card for each other dinosaur you control. This is why I was thinking 6/6, because we've got the Dreadmaw back.
They power crept Colossal Dreadmaw. What is there to say? I mean, I do wish this drew one off of itself. Also, this one is one of the inspirations of the bounty board. I'm pretty sure it was to draw 6 cards off of an Earthshaker Dreadmaw. Good luck with that one, folks. I cannot wait to see that screenshot. That's going to be so sick. Yeah, this card's great. I mean, again, in the dinosaur vector, you'll know when you see this like 5th pick and green is felt open, you're like, okay, time to go in, because it seems like other people aren't interested. And hopefully people get good at drafting the set, because then it'll be like a cube, right? Where you'll know if you're playing like Vintage Cube or something and you go, there's a Mishra's Workshop, a land that taps for artifact mana, right? But you can only spend it on artifacts. Then you might go, I can wheel this because I know nobody else is interested. And you often will, because everyone else is playing. They're going to be smart and they're not going to say, I can use this. I can probably fit that in my deck somehow. They'll go, no, I'm going to take a better card for my deck. And then you'll wheel the workshop and you'll be happy. Hopefully that's how this set ends up going down, because, I mean, these dinosaurs are pretty cool. If this vector's open, it'll be a lot of fun to play.
Yeah. Typically with these types of decks too, you kind of need ways to power these things out. We've seen a few nicely costed dinosaurs here, 2 mana, 3 mana. Of course, the Earthshaker Dreadmaw is quite a bit more than that, but we usually are looking for some sort of mana dork, and we do have one of those in Ishali's Lordkeeper. This is green for 1/1 at uncommon. Tap, add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast a dinosaur spell or activate an ability of a dinosaur source.
A dinosaurs, if you will.
A dinosaurs, yes. That's pretty sweet. I mean, it's a 1-drop, so it's serving the Llanowar elf, role here in this sort of set, but it does, taps for any color. So Birds of Paradise. And this deck is going to really want that. And there aren't dinosaurs in other colors. There's 1 in black and I believe 2 in blue, but the rest are all red-green. So you're not necessarily needing the extra mana color, but activated abilities may change that math a little bit. I don't know them all off the top of my head, so that could matter. That color difference could matter, but it'll be nice to pick these up. It is uncommon, so you're not going to see them very often, but that is something to keep an eye out for.
Again, only on average, probably 1 person at the table will want this, similar to the Dreadmaw and the Yearling.
So next up, we've got Burning Sun Cavalry. This is 1 in a red for a 2/2 at common. So 2 mana, 2/2. Whenever it attacks or blocks while you control a dinosaur, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It's a human knight. So this one is not a dinosaur, but the humans and the dinos do enjoy each other on this plane. So, it's a nice little just extra 2/2 for 2 mana, 2/2 for your curve. And it's going to scale with the rest of the game as you play your other dinosaurs. I mean, you go 2-drop this on 2 into the armored kin caller. And now you've got 2 3/3s on turn 3, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah. Maybe even reroll dinosaur, gain 3 life. Seems like a pretty reasonable curve for just commons.
And then lastly, for this vector, we've got Triumphant Champ. This is red for a sorcery at uncommon. Triumphant Chomp. Triumphant Chomp deals damage to target creature equal to 2 or the greatest power among dinosaurs you control, whichever is greater. So nice little shock that scales really well. The best lightning bolt ever.
Yeah. And that is target creature. Man, whenever I see a 1 mana red burn spell, a couple places you want to look. Is it an instant or a sorcery? It's a sorcery. Does it go face? No.
Yeah, this does get the short end of the stick on both of those sort of areas, but I mean, it's 1 mana deal 6. Like,
yeah. And the later in the game you go, the more this will need to be a deal 6, right? The more you'll want to kill your opponent's big stuff or things that have a bunch of counters on them or a pesky flyer. Yeah, hard to argue with this one. It is funny that this is the name you mispronounced, though. Yeah,
I know.
Ishali's Lordkeeper, like all these other ones. And all right, let's see if I eventually get one that's hard to say. It won't be this time. Kutsil Malamet Exemplar is our next vector here in green-white. We're going to call this vector Power points in the direction of the. I was making a PowerPoint when I was doing this. I don't know if that had any effect on my naming convention. Anyway, this is 1 green white for a 3/3 cat warrior. Again, it's a legend. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. All right, so just counter spells don't exist anymore. That's cool. I'm saying that 100% genuinely. I love that. Big fan of that effect. And then whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card.
This is a wacky card. I saw some people on Twitter talking about this one, and the rules text doesn't quite seem super clear. So it says whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So overall, this says if you attack with any number of creatures, you at most draw 1 card. However, when you attack with more than 1 creature, each creature you're attacking with needs to have power greater than its base power in order for you to draw that 1 card.
And then they have to hit too.
And they have to hit because they do have to deal combat damage to a player. So this kind of weirdly makes it like doesn't want you to go wide necessarily unless you can reliably buff everything. You really want to be able to like buff a thing, attack with just the one thing, because if you attack with more like 2 things and only one of them is buffed, you're not drawing the card off of this, even if they both hit.
That being said, anthem effects or being able to control which creatures explore, map tokens would go well here, because that way you can choose where the counters go. If you hit a land, I guess you got to try again, right? Yeah, there's some action here. I mean, and you're going to be safe as you're doing this because your opponents can't cast combat tricks on you.
Exactly.
They can't counter your stuff. So it could still kind of locks you down and says, all right, you're safe, but if you want to actually get better value out of this card, you have to jump through some hoops. All right. We've got first up here, Sonota Scout, which I definitely didn't just double check the pronunciation for in between cards. This is a single green mana. It's an uncommon. It's a 1/1, and it says when it enters the battlefield, it explores. Well, I thought that was a common too. Okay, this set symbol has officially tripped me up multiple times. I mean, 1 mana, 1/1 explore. That is great value. This is either a 1 mana 1/1 put a land into your hand, which is great, or it's a 1 mana 2/2, which is great, and then it even gives you some selection over the top card of your library. I mean, you can. I would never keep a 1-lander with this. I might keep a 2-lander with this and a low curve, depending on the context of my deck, of course. But I mean, a solid card.
Yeah, I mean, it also plays really well with that uncommon we just looked at. Explorer is going to put counters on things, which is a permanent way to give them a base power that's a power that's higher than their base. So this already just plays nicely with that, and you're going to be looking for permanent ways to do that through counters, I think, throughout the rest of this vector.
Now, here's an impermanent way to do it. Family Reunion, 1 of the white. It's an instant at common. Choose 1. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn, or creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn. I don't really know when you need to give multiple creatures hexproof. That doesn't come up super often. I guess if there's like a fireball effect being spread out. Yeah, no, this is nice. Doesn't seem that good, to be honest. But this would properly trigger our vector uncommon, right? This would see that all creatures that are attacking have have a power higher than their base power, right? So that's fine. I mean, this is a modal spell where neither half is super great in the average deck. If you can build into a super really go wide vector, then the buff could be something. If you make a bunch of tokens somehow, or if you have a really, I don't know, low curve and you just dump your whole hand and then buff them all. Doesn't seem great though. And then this gaining hexproof, this is fine. This can stop like a good removal spell. But I don't think I'm going to put this in my deck outside of like very specific vectors. Doesn't even seem like it's worth it to help enable Kutsil.
No, I agree. It's nice to have the flexibility that this can be used offensively or defensively in one card, but it's not. I don't know that it's worth a card slot.
Yeah, if you're making everybody happy, you're really making nobody happy, right?
Yeah.
So next up is Jade Seed Stones. This is a much better example of an effect that this deck wants. This vector, 3 and a green. It's an artifact. It's an uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. So cool. It's just 4 mana for 3 1/1s across any number of creatures you want. Awesome. Pretty solid rate. And then it has Craft with Creature. Okay. I guess you'd prefer one to be in your graveyard. You'd rather not exile a creature you control. And also it costs 7, 5 green. Noticing a lot of 7 mana activated abilities in this set. It's kind of a recurring theme. Even one of the first spoilers we got was a 2/2 and had an activated ability of 7 mana. And then it made turn one of your lands into a fungus or something. I don't even know. So I guess you want to make sure your deck can get you there. Sonota Scout is good for that because it ensures you're hitting your land drops, as do other Explorer cards. And I guess drawing cards off of Kutsil would be good too, ensuring you hit your land drops and can activate these abilities. This flips into Jadeheart Attendant. It's a 7/7. It's a golem. When it enters the battlefield, you gain life equal to the mana value of the exiled card used to craft it. That's pretty cool. This means if you exile something with 5 power from your graveyard, this thing flips into a 7/7, gain 5. That is a really good board stabilizer. I mean, that's worth paying 7 mana for, right? So both halves of this are kind of what you expect. You pay 4 mana for 3 counters, and then you pay 7 mana for a 7/7. All right.
Yeah, and again, ideally, you're not paying 7 mana and a creature to do that. You're exiling a creature that already died at some point that you aren't going to get back from your graveyard. Another rebirth effects, but if you're sacking a creature on board to this, it's probably not worth doing.
Yeah, you don't want that.
No. Also, I'll throw out there too, a lot of these 7 mana effects, like we saw on Canonized in whatever that was, the 2 mana enchantment that cares about descending, Canonized in Blood. And there was the 5 or 4 blue craft with artifact creature. A lot of these 7 mana activated abilities are double pipped, which means they're going to be relatively difficult to splash the craft part of it or whatever the activated ability is. So just something to keep in mind. I don't know that that'll actually be a huge issue, but a lot of them are double pipped.
Uh-oh. This is just adventure with extra steps, isn't it? Think about it. I suppose so. You got the front half, then you got the back half. Man.
Which is really just kicker with extra steps.
This is just kicker with extra. All right. Next up, we've got Malamet Warscribe, another overrun style card. 3 green for a 4/3 cat warrior at uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Yikes. That is a big effect. This makes your 1/1s into 3/2s. That's really strong.
Yeah, I mean, we saw just how powerful Imidane's Recruiter was, and part of the power in that card was the fact that you could also make 2 creatures with it, but even when you could only craft. I've got craft on the mind. Even when you could only cast the Recruiter, it still was backbreaking for most games. There's a reason that card did so well. Warscribe is a monocolored card. Similar effects, it's bigger even.
Yeah. I've also got craft on the mind, but that's mostly because it's dinner time and I'm getting hungry. I'm still thinking about what pairs best with it. Malamet Warscribe, I think, will go best, again, in a vector where you can build out your board wide. White has the ability to do that, right? White is going to have some token makers we'll see later on. So I think this card can have a home in this vector in green-white because of this buff. I mean, green-white is always pretty good at going wide and then buffing tall. And while Kutsil pays you off for that in a bit of a weird way, this at least has a body attached to it. I'd rather play this as my pump effect than the family reunion.
Yeah, it does also buff itself. It's not other creatures. So if somehow you can give this haste, you'll have a nice 6/4 attacker, I guess. It's pretty great.
Here's a cool one. Kinjali's Dawn Runner. 2 and a white, 1/1 human scout. Double strike at uncommon. When it ETBs, it explores. Nice. Wears buffs and counters very well, as do all double strikers. And I don't know which you prefer. I guess you prefer this to come as a 3 mana 2/2 double strike, because that's just a pretty good rate. And then counters on it, make it a 3/3 double strike or more. Another good one to pair with map tokens and map token creators. But this one, I mean, even if it's just a 3-mana 1/1 double strike and you draw a land off the top, you're not super upset about that, right?
Yeah, no, it seems pretty great.
Now, we notice this vector can dip into red a little bit here because of red's good combat tricks. Red has always had good combat tricks, right? And that could pair maybe in like a red-white deck where it has this vector of, buffing. I mean, Ancestor's Aid. 1 in a red, instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. It's a common. So just 1 in a red 2/0 on something like Kinjali's Dawnrunner. Nice. You'll just kill someone out of nowhere with that. Also, I didn't finish reading the card. You make a treasure token too. Now, I do want to mention something about combat tricks in this set. I think you're going to be allowing less slots for them than usual. Whereas in a typical set, you might have allowed, 2-3 slots for like a solid combat trick. I think you may have to cut those in favor of permanents, at least if that's what your vector calls for. Red-white, green-white, these don't seem to care about descending that much. So you can probably get away with playing some tricks. But even a green-white deck will probably have a handful of cards that care about descending or descent in some way, shape, or form, right? So just be careful with combat tricks. I don't actually think black-red would want this very often, right? Because this does nothing to descend each turn. It doesn't help that vector at all. It does more align with this aggressive one.
All right,
here's a good one for you.
Yeah, next up we've got white-black Bartolome del Presidio. This is white and black for a 2/1. Legendary creature, Vampire Knight. Sack another creature or artifact. Put a +1/+1 counter on Bartolome. Yeah, classic
busted.
Classic sack outlet, sack effect style deck. Aristocrats. We're calling this Aristobats for reasons you'll understand in a bit. And this is a sack outlet that doesn't require a mana investment, which are always like cards that you should raise an eyebrow at and wonder just how good that can be in this format, because this also, in a rare occurrence these days, does not say activate only once a turn.
Or sorcery speed, or any of that
or
garbage.
any of those kinds of things. And it doesn't just sack creatures, it sacks artifacts. Map tokens, any of the random treasure tokens that you're going to have floating around. This seems pretty crazy.
This card is, I don't know.
Kill on sight?
Early draft Chaff hero, potentially? Maybe?
Could be.
I mean, it's just unbounded, right? I mean, I know Pioneer players are already stoked for this. So good chance limited players should take note. It's not always a general rule that, cards that see constructed play are good in standard, or are good in limited rather. But there's probably a trend there. This obviously works really well with going wide at token wise, right? Getting little investments here and there along the way to then be able to sack stuff. And again, you can kind of see how this would pair with the black-red version of Descend, where you could splash this in a black-red Descend deck if you had enough of those cards you're interested in. For example, the Mycoid, right? Because with Bartolome, you can actually just sack something you've got laying around every turn, an artifact or some random creature you don't care about, or one that's designed to die, or maybe even be reanimated or have an activated ability from your graveyard. So cool stuff going on with Bartolome here.
Indeed. Good old Bart. All right, so next up we've got Dusk Rose Reliquary. This is white for an artifact at uncommon. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sack an artifact or creature. It has Ward 2. And when Dusk Rose Reliquary enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until Dusk Rose Reliquary leaves the battlefield. Nice little like glass casket O-ring effect, and with Ward on there as extra protection, feels less bad that you have to sack something to this to get the effect. But at 1 mana, and the fact that you can sack artifacts like map tokens feels really good.
Yeah, great way to use that. It's kind of funny. You do kind of want to have tokens laying around for this. Maybe like a sapling. No, mycoid. No, fungus. No, rat. Fungus.
No, they're fungus rats.
They have decay. No, they can't block. So funny enough with this, you could sack a real permanent if you wanted to trigger Descend that turn, or you could just sack like a map token if you don't care about hitting Descend that turn. And yeah, this one, it's hard to blow this out. A braid is in this set, and it's hard for me to look at this and not immediately think this gets abraded. But even then,
Yeah.
the word 2 helps. And I don't know, maybe you put something under it that when it comes back in, it's not as effective as it was before. Maybe you use this to take out something that had a million counters on it. Plus, it's 1 mana. Like, you're trading like positively on mana for this almost no matter what.
Depending what you sack, yeah. And you could see this potentially be used in like, I'm thinking in like some more red aggressive decks, maybe something like that red uncommon that, you know, when you descend, it makes a treasure.
Yeah.
You know, you could sack the treasure to this and use it in like an aggressive shell to just get rid of a blocker on turn like 2 or 3 and just push in damage.
By the time they'd be able to blow it up, they'd be dead.
Right, exactly. Next up, we have Mephitic Draft. This is 1 and a black for an artifact at common. When Mephitic Draft enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose a life.
Oh my god, this card is so sick.
It's really cool. This is going to be great in a lot of vectors. It triggers Descend. It's something you're fine crafting away. I mean, I guess you don't get the graveyard trigger, but it's like a 2 mana, just draw a card, lose 1. Like, you're okay kind of using it for that. And otherwise, like, yeah, I mean, any of these like symmetrical ETB and leaves battlefield effects are great. It just fits right in at home here.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, it is at its best if you can make this a 2 mana draw 2, lose 2. I mean, that's Night's Whisper. That's like a modern playable card. If you're doing this, it means that you do care about artifacts going to the graveyard. So that can enable crafting, right? If you can just get this in there and you can craft it away from the graveyard. Like you mentioned, it's not the worst if you have to craft away from the board. Think of this with Bartolome, right? You just immediately sack it.
So good. So good.
So gas. Like this card is the definition of gas for one of these limited decks. Like, you rip this off the top when your hand was starting to look a little dry and you're like, oh man, time to kick it up into high gear.
Feel great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got Helping Hand. This is white for a sorcery at uncommon. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped.
Oh, that tapped. That's rough.
Yeah, that hurts.
But 3 or less. That's a lot for 1 mana. These usually cost 2, don't they?
Yeah. What did we have? Return Triumphant in the last set was a 2 mana. That did give you the roll token, but yeah, I guess you kind of need the tapped drawback here to make it worth the 1 mana and not be like really kind of pushed. It is an uncommon too, which I'm a little surprised to see, but there's a lot of stuff you can get back, especially in a set like in a vector like this where you're just looking to sack as much as you can and gain value off those things. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, and this probably pairs best with high value creatures like Bartolome. Having a single copy of him would be a good reason to run Helping Hand, just because your opponent's going to try to kill him.
Oh yeah. Next up, we've got Vanguard of the Rose. This is 1 and a white for a 3/1 Vampire Knight at uncommon. It has an activated ability of 1, sack another creature or artifact. Vanguard of the Rose gains indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. Seasoned Hallowblade's back, baby.
We got another Seasoned Hallowblade. I mean, it's not quite the same, but it's pretty close. Unfortunately, I have to pay. It's funny. They put Bartolome and a fixed version of him in the same set.
Right.
Wacky.
Well, maybe they are making the assumption that Bartolome being 2 colors is fixing him, but I don't buy it. This is a real cost, though. I think, I'm making a joke about Seasoned Hallowblade being back, but sacking a creature artifact every time you want to activate this is a real cost. That is not going to be easy to do for most decks all the time. And so you probably want to be pretty selective with this, but just having threat of activation is valuable. People are probably not likely to point removal at something like this if you have anything else on the board. So less of something you probably want to actually activate and more you just want to keep up having that threat of activation.
This is the type of card that just by design reduces your opponent's options. It makes them say, okay, well, now if they try to target anything, you can always just sack that thing to the Vanguard and then it gets indestructible. Be sure to leave up mana for this one. This is the one that the worst blowouts are going to happen when you are like, oh, I don't have to leave the mana up this turn. I'm going to tap out for something. And then they have like the 1 mana deal 1 or something. And you're like, man, why did I shouldn't have.
Next up, we have Soul Coil Viper. This is 2 and a black, 2/3 snake. at uncommon. It has an activated ability of black, tap, sack it, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. This is a better helping hand effect.
This is a straight up reanimate. Like,
oh yeah, it's great.
Now you have to tap. So there's that 1 turn window where your opponent has the ability to kill this, but then then they've killed your 2 mana 2/3, and you're like, okay, next.
Well, 3 mana 2/3, but I also missed the line of text that says activate only as a sorcery, so there is that.
Bummer.
But just being able to reanimate anything is pretty solid. And if you have ways to bounce or otherwise get rid of that finality counter, you can maybe get some extra value out. Seems pretty sweet.
Yeah. And there might be an actual reanimator deck. I would expect in the Abzan combinations, black and white don't usually have giant things to reanimate. There's a couple. But really, if you could reanimate a giant green dinosaur or something with this, then you really did it.
Next up is Skullcap Snail. This is 1 and a black for a 1/1 fungus snail at common. Love that type line. That's hilarious. When Skullcap Snail enters the battlefield, target opponent exiles a card from their hand. Now, this is one that it's a 2 mana 1/1, so behind on rate that way. Also gives your opponent full selection of the card, but it does exile, so it's not triggering descend for them. And that's a good thing. But otherwise, this feels kind of bad. It's a great thing to sack, though. Great card to sack.
Yeah, this was the Nezumi a couple sets ago in Neon Dynasty, and that card ended up being great. Of course, in that set, you could rebuy it using ninjutsu. This one, I think, is more going to be used as sack fodder. This is the type of card that, I think this is going to be a bread and butter 2-drop for the sacrifice decks, both black-red and black-white. Not necessarily black-green. They're not as interested in this effect. They more care to establish board presence or start milling. But this, all of this thing's power is with that ETB, right? So this could also turn on craft with the creature because you don't really care about the body. But sacking this, I think, is going to be the best use. And that ETB, that's just, great.
Yeah, worth noting, all the craft with creature cards kind of go up a little bit in this vector because you're sacking your creatures for extra value anyway. You can pretty much guarantee you're going to have creatures in your graveyard to craft away. That said, I think with Skullcap Snail, you have to kind of do some finagling with your deck itself, whatever the deck composition ends up being, to decide whether a 2 mana 1/1 body is worth putting in your deck, even if it's going to enable sack outlets and other such effects. Next up, we've got Synapse Necromage. This is 2 and a black for a 3/1 fungus wizard at uncommon. When Synapse Necromage dies, create 2 1/1 black fungus creature tokens with this creature can't block.
Sweet.
Yeah, I think this is kind of funny because in a way, they let the rat tokens die and decay into fungus.
What?
They all kind of come together. The rats, the decay tokens, the fungus tokens.
What? I'm losing it. Or maybe you are. What I wouldn't give for a skull clamp with this card. Can you imagine? Just pay 3, draw 6. Ugh. Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Moving on to our next vector here, black-green, which we've labeled Underground Pound. Yeah. It got later and later in the night as I was writing these. Akawali, the Seething Tower. 1 black-green for a 3/3 fungus. It's a legend. It has 2 descend abilities, 1 descend 4, 1 descend 8. Descend 4, as long as there are 4 more permanent cards in your graveyard, Akawali, the Seething Tower, gets +2/+2 and has trample. Okay. 3 mana, 5/5 trample, as long as you have descend 4. Descend 4, I feel like a dedicated black-green deck could turn on by turn 3 or 4 reasonably if it's trying to do that. Of course, if you play this, it's not contributing itself. It is just functionally a vanilla card, right? Until you actually do something to put stuff in your graveyard. But I think on turn 4, it wouldn't be unreasonable to have Descend 4 active. And then you're hitting on turn 4 or 5-ish with a 5/5 trample for 3. That's really good.
Yeah. I'm skeptical that turn 4 will be that easy to hit. especially if you're playing cards that care about having descended. If you like take the first 4 turns off to do nothing but put permanents in your graveyard, I could see probably, but I think personally, I think we're going to see it closer to 5 or 6. But either way, Descend's cool because it's not something that like needs to trigger as like an ETB or something. It doesn't check when the card enters battlefield or whatever. It's checking constantly, so you can build up to it later, even after having casted Aquawali. But we aren't even done reading the card.
Descend to 8. As long as there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, it gets an additional +2/+2 and can't be blocked by more than one creature. Then you've got a 7/7 trample, can't be blocked by more than one creature. That's a really tough win condition to beat. I mean, you can't trump it. It's going to trample. Yeah, that's your 3-mana investment. This scales with the game pretty well. I mean, this is a 3-drop that when you top deck it on turn 10 or 12, you're like, sweet. Is it a 5/5 or a 7/7 yet? Like,
yeah.
You're willing to build towards this, right? Like you're going to want to have a ton of permanents in your deck to actually make this happen. You can't play like 7 or 8 non-permanent spells with this. You better be playing those artifacts, the ETB to do things.
Yeah, this is the deck that cares about Descend 8 and is most likely going to be your no instants and sorceries deck, if I have to venture a guess.
Let's actually start with the second one in here, Deathcap Marionette. And this is the one that makes me think it's actually doable by turn 4 or 5. 1 of the black, 1/1 fungus with Death Touch. 1/1 Death Touch for 2. Solid body, okay. But when it enters the battlefield, you may mill 2 cards. Boom. It trades off itself. It puts stuff in the graveyard. In a deck full of only permanents, then this helps you hit it pretty quick.
Yeah, that's true. This at common does make it feel like the Descend 4 thing is definitely more supported early on than I think I believed earlier.
Plus, look at that art. What's going on?
Good. Pretty weird.
We've got a Stinging Cave Crawler up next. 2 in a black. It's a 1/3 insect horror at uncommon now. It also has Death Touch. So these early game Death Touchers really going to slow down the board. I mean, if you're playing dinosaurs and you see these on the other side, you're like, man, I guess I just have to wait until I top deck a removal spell because you don't want to trade down on mana like that. Now, Stinging Cave Spider, again, 3-mana 1/3 Death Touch. When it attacks, Descend 4, if there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you draw a card and lose a life. That's sick.
That is quite good. Yeah, don't have to worry about it getting through and hitting anything. Just needs to attack. It's one of those that you can reasonably see. I mean, this is kind of expensive, a 3-mana spell. So it's not like you're necessarily going to be forcing your opponent to trade down on mana, but hey, going up cards and stuff is just great. And if they want to let this ping them for 1 to let you draw a card, like that's awesome. Otherwise, you're going to trade with something.
Yeah. Well, it's not forcing them to trade down on mana. It does kind of force them to trade a card. Because like you can't let them keep doing this. Like if you have a 3/3, you just snap block in front of this. So then in that case, it actually would pair kind of well with like a first strike combat trick like that red one we saw earlier. I also the fact that it has Death Touch, so any first strike combat trick will be great with this. But also with the Stinging Cave Crawler, if that does happen, then you are up a card, right? Because you drew the card and lost a life. And I'm assuming you only attack with this if you have that Descend 4 active. So the Deathcap Marionette and the Stinging Cave Crawler, these pair really well, and they're definitely best at home in black-green.
Yeah.
Chupacabra Echo. They killed my boy. He's dead now. This is 2 black for a Beast Horror Spirit at uncommon. It's a 3/2 and it has Fathomless Descent. There's only a handful of cards with this in the set. When it ETBs, target creature and opponent controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So obviously, you want to have as many permanents in your graveyard as you physically can manage. Deathcap Marionette will help with this. Other self-mill things will help with this. There was the black flyer we saw earlier that mills a card when you attack. The 3-mana 2/2 flyer. It was like a spirit or something. Any ways you can get stuff in the graveyard is great for the Chupacabra Echo. I mean, this is going to be one of the best uncommons in the set. This is 4 mana, kill anything, leave behind a 3/2.
Yeah, and then also, this is one, obviously it's more flexible because you don't have to hit those specific 4 or 8 numbers from the other Descend cards. But if you're evaluating this as if it had Descend 4, and let's say it just was like kill target, destroy target creature if you have Descend 4, still really good. And if the rest of your deck is kind of built as this machine to generate Descend 4 and make sure Descend 4 happens, -4/-4 to just about anything is like reliably is quite good. And it just gets better. And it's also more flexible because it can be smaller than that.
Something to keep in mind here, black, red, and black, white, this might not be that good there.
Yeah,
think about like
you need to get permanents in your graveyard. Black, white can, with the sack outlets, might actually be able to make it happen. And make this like -3/-3 pretty reliably. But you need you need to be able to get those permanents in the graveyard. So the other black decks that can't do that as reliably will probably not want this card. Yeah.
This is the big difference between those two vectors, right? Between the descend once every turn thing and the dump as many things as you can to hit descend 8. Blue black and green black both clearly want to be dumping as many things in the graveyard as possible, just to turn on stuff like this. Whereas black red, I could see you draw this and it's turn 4 and you have no permanents in the graveyard yet. Because maybe even in black white, you've been sacking tokens to Bartholomew, right? And nothing's in the grave yet. So be careful with how you use this. Be careful that obviously you're still going to put it in your deck, right? I mean, it's great in the late game. You'd probably never cut this, but I guess it is at best in this certain dump your graveyard immediately vector.
I could see though in black red specifically, this could be really contentious. I could see putting this on the chopping block because it incentivizes you to do something the vector of your deck is not actually looking to do. And that is if you have this in your hand and like 2 or 3 of the cards on the battlefield that say at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, do X. If this is in your hand and you've only got like 1 or 2 permanents in the graveyard and you kind of need to get rid of a creature, you're like forced to spend your cards that enable you to descend in 1 turn, and then the rest of your cards kind of shut off after that, right?
Exactly.
Because you can't descend further. So there's like actual tension here between this card and what that vector wants to do. And I think that's why vector theory is nice for a set like this, because it helps us kind of pay attention to where this otherwise very good card actually might be worth cutting because it's not doing what the deck is lining up to do, even though it is in the color and it feels like it should fit.
There's also a lot of tension between the box of Kraft mac and cheese in my my closet and my stomach right now. Next card up here is another chance. Just like how I'm going to give Kraft mac and cheese yet another chance. 2 and a black.
Not
instant.
Sponsored, by the way. Not sponsored.
God, I wish. 2 and a black, common, instant. You may mill 2 cards. So another may mill 2. Nice. Then return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Cool. I mean, in a deck where you have dumped your entire deck into your graveyard, this helps you get back any of them. This is nice because sometimes these effects only let you grab from the pile that you dumped with the card's effect, but this lets you get back any 2 cards. So maybe you did mill a Chupacabra Echo earlier, and now you have like 7 creatures in the graveyard. Then you can just get it back. Good stuff.
Yeah, I could see this one potentially being decent in red black as well because it lets you mill and then like you get the value back from the card because you can return it to your hand.
How about some green cards for this vector? Here's one that I know we all love already. Basking Capybara. 1 and a green. It's a 1/3 Capybara at common, and it has Descend 4. It gets +3/+0 as long as there are 4 more permanents in your graveyard. So 2 mana 1/3. Awful. Unplayable by itself. It's just vanilla. But 2 mana 4/4. Tarmogoyf. All-timer.
Well, it'd be a 4/3, but yeah.
Oh yeah, 4/3. Okay, so not quite a Tarmogoyf. Still, 2 mana 4/3. It's pretty solid.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. I'm curious how these decks will play out. I mean, obviously you want to be hitting Descent 4. Whether you want to spend turn 2 to enable Descend better or just put this dumb 1/3 on the board, I think is potentially a tension point for this deck as well. Like, I don't know which you're going to want to do more, or if you need to establish an early baseline of protection in terms of board state before you can start trying to actively go after making Descend 4 happen, or if you kind of just want to say, forget it. I don't care about playing creatures. I just need to play stuff that gets permanents in the graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
I mean, to be clear, this is for this deck in particular, like the black-green vector that's trying to do this. This is like a strictly worse Death Cat Marionette. I would always cut a Capybara for the Marionette, and I would never cut a Marionette for a Capybara. But if you're short on Marionettes, because they'll be in high demand, this is an option.
Yep. Also, I know everybody loves the Capybara in the art for this, but I'm gravitating toward the beautiful little bird dinos that are down in the bottom left or like middle left of the.
Oh, I didn't even see those. Yeah, card. They are like little like Archaeopteryx type guys.
Yeah,
cool. Next up, we've got a funky raccoon, a Quadi scavenger. I need a biologist to weigh in on this one. Are Quadi the same genus as raccoons? I'm not sure. I have to pull up the Wikipedia tree for that. I know they're related for sure, but I don't know. Are they literal raccoons? I don't know. 2 and a green for a 3/2 raccoon at uncommon. It is descend 4 when at ETBs. If there are 4 more permanent cards in your graveyard, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Any permanent in a set full of good permanents. Sick. Love this little guy.
Yep, does go to your hand, and this one is an ETB, so you can't get the descend thing after it enters battlefield. So something to keep an eye on. Base, if you don't have descend 4 yet, it's a 3-mana 3/2. Probably don't care to play it, but it's an uncommon. So that leads me again to kind of think, okay, maybe we are going to be hitting descend 4 pretty regularly in this vector. And if that's the case, yeah, being able to return anything. Though I will also add, it's not a May. You have to return a permanent card from your graveyard.
You could turn off descend 4.
Turn off descend 4. Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, I mean, worst case, you just get back like a land and you play it that turn. If it's really, well, no, then it doesn't. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's a little weird.
It could be pretty awkward.
Interesting May. Interesting May ability there, or interesting lack of May ability rather. Yeah, I think this one's going to be solid. But again, a green-red dinosaurs deck might never want this. It would be awful in that deck. Finally, here for this vector, we've got Walk with the Ancestors. This is one that I'm not sure if it's going to be good, but it is going to be sick. It's 4 and a green, sorcery. Return up to 1 target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Discover 4. So a regrowth with Cascade. How about it?
Yeah, I mean, in a set full of like permanents that you want to be playing with, pretty cool. It is also up to, so this is like a weird, you could just potentially make this 5 mana play the first 4-drop in your deck.
Oh, well, it could be a 1-drop.
It could be a 1-drop. Yeah, that's true. That doesn't sound great to me. Even if this was like the random aspect to discover is something that makes, and I mean, the same is true for Cascade, right? But it makes evaluating cards very difficult because, again, really depends on the composition of your deck. If you're running a rather middle heavy curve where you're like really have a lot of 3s and 4s, this probably is quite a bit better. If you're playing a bunch of 1s and 2s, probably not good. Yeah, I don't think I love this card, but to your point, it's going to lead to some really cool plays.
All right, hear me out. You cast Walk, right? You discover into a Quadi Scavenger. The card you get back from your graveyard with Walk with the Ancestors, another Quadi Scavenger. You do this forever.
Okay.
All right.
If that's the best this card does, I don't know that it's worth the card slot.
You could play 2 Quadi Scavengers. All right, yeah. I would probably just play 2 and cut that card.
Okay, another card I can't pronounce properly. Nikanziel?
It's probably better.
Maybe. Nikanziel? I don't know. Current Conductor. This is green and a blue for a 2/3 Merfolk Scout at uncommon. Whenever a creature you control explores a land, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So if you explore, see the land, you put it in your hand, you can put that in the battlefield.
Cool.
Whenever a creature you control explores a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on Nikanziel Current Conductor. So either all your explore stuff lands in the battlefield, or you're getting an additional counter on this creature, and obviously the one on the creature that did the exploring.
So a turbo explore vector. It's very obvious what this card is telling us to do.
Also, 2-mana 2/3 is just pretty decent body.
Yeah. Now then again, let's say you take this and you wind up with a blue-green deck full of dinosaurs and descend cards. Then this does nothing.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. All right, so let's find out what we should be doing. First up here, we've got Twists and Turns. This is green for an enchantment at uncommon. If a creature you control would explore, instead you scry one, then that creature explores. Nice little way to set up those explorers. Give Nikanziel whatever effect you want her to have. When Twists and Turns enters the battlefield, target creature you control explores. Okay, so it's a 1-mana, still doing something when it ETBs, but then obviously that thing also then gets that scry benefit. And when a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands, transform Twists and Turns. Then it flips into Mycoid Maze, which is a land with the cave subtype, which is relevant in this set. We'll get to that in a bit. It has tap, add green, and then it has an activated ability of 3 green tap. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put that card into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order.
Do you remember Search for Ascanta?
Yeah. This
This
is kind
does
of
a
that.
pretty good. Yeah, the backside of this, Ascanta the Sunken Ruin did this for artifacts for instants and sorceries rather, and that card was awesome. I mean, that was a constructed all-star for about as it's still in cubes today. This is obviously very different. This is sort of like a limited playable creature Search for Ascanta because that backside is really really strong. If you can get that ability there on that land, the 4 mana, look for the top 4, get a creature. I mean, that's just going to win the game if left unchecked.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Twist and Turns alone has a lot going on for a 1-mana card. I mean, just the fact that you get to turn all your explorers into scry ones first, and then you get to explore, really cool. Yeah, this card seems sweet. I'm not surprised it's an uncommon over common. Actually, I could potentially see something like this being a rare. Wasn't Search for Ascanta a rare?
It was, yeah.
Next up, we have Glowcap Lantern. This is green for an artifact equipment at uncommon. The equipped creature has, you may look at the top card of your library anytime, and whenever this creature attacks, it explores. So that's interesting because obviously you can't manipulate the top of your deck. You just get to look at the card, but that means you can set up attacks in weird ways where you can attack with something because it's going to explore a counter on it. It just gives you a little bit of extra information, which is kind of nice, I guess. But then it has Equip 2, and I don't think this is a card that's worth equipping for 2 mana. Maybe it is if you really need those explore triggers, because that's not nothing. And you can move it around, obviously, but Equip 2 is relatively, that's expensive.
What if you consider the next card?
Well, our next card is Merfolk Cave Diver, and this is 2 and a blue for Merfolk Scout at uncommon as well. It's a 2/4, and whenever a creature you control explores, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn.
Splinter Twin? Is this format broken?
I mean, it's a lot of mana and it is 2 uncommons, so probably not, but
we broke the format. It's over.
Yeah, we broke it. You heard it here first.
Pack it up.
This is pretty cool effect though, and being able to give that thing Explorer and then obviously put a counter on it and then the additional +1/+0 and not be able to block. This thing gets huge and unblockable, and yeah, it's cute.
To be honest, going back to Glowcap Lantern, I like this just on cheap flyers.
Yeah, I'm just a little skeptical of the Equip 2, but Explore thing is not nothing. And really, given that you can look, right? Because if you know there's a land on top, you don't have to risk attacking. If you know you're going to get the counter, you can set up those attacks. So I do like that optionality there. But Equip 2 feels expensive. Next up, we have Seeker of Sunlight. This is green for a 1/1 at common. It has an activated ability of 2 green. So 3 mana total. Seeker of Sunlight explores. Activate only as a sorcery. So this is a nice repeatable explore effect. A little expensive. I don't know if I don't recall in the last set having abilities like this where you could just pay mana to explore, like these repeatable explore.
I think there was
effects.
one. I think it was mostly ETBs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how to evaluate whether 3 mana is worth exploring exactly. Again, will also kind of depend on the structure of your deck a little bit, but we're really comparing land versus non-land, and so it does seem sweet. It's an expensive effect. I think most decks are going to rather just play a 3-drop on 3. But it's a nice mana sink later. You activate only as a sorcery, but you can do this as many times as you have the mana do it. So that's also quite good.
Yeah, and if you're drawing lands and hitting those land drops, you'll have it. This will be good for the decks that really care about Explorer triggering. Outside of that, I think this is probably pretty bad. Like a Dinosaurs deck, a Graveyard deck, they're not interested in this at all. This would be junk.
Well, I could see this potentially going in a black-green deck because Explorer does enable Descend.
Yeah, that's true. What if it just keeps drawing lands?
Yeah, if you just keep... Yeah, but those decks want to kind of turbo out lands anyway, in some capacity.
Yeah, I guess at that point you've put a lot of mana into it. I don't know. This feels like weaker. This is on the weaker end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah,
but
totally
I think
agree.
the Explorer deck is where it's this card's home, right?
If it has one. Yeah, if this card has a home, it will be here.
Yeah.
And then lastly, we have Lodestone Needle, which we talked about earlier. This is one of the blue for the artifact uncommon. With Flash, ETB, tap up to one target artifact or creature and put 2 stun counters on it. And then it crafts with artifact for 2 and a blue and flips into Guidestone Compass, which is effectively a map.
A map that never sacks.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I actually missed that. Yeah.
Next up here, we've got Captain Lannery Storm. That was a rare last time. Now it's just Captain Storm, Cosmium Raider for our pirate pilfering vector. This is blue-red for a 2/2 human pirate, a legend. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. Funny. So obviously, Captain Storm herself is a pirate. So at worst, this is whenever an artifact enters, put a 1/1 counter on this. That's pretty close to that. What was it, like a patchwork something or patchwork automaton? Where whenever you cast an artifact, you got a 1/1 counter, and that thing's seen a lot of play in older formats now. I don't know if this is going to have the same thing, but this is target pirate you control. And pirates, treasure, maps, these things all go hand in hand, right?
Sure do.
Let's take a look at Cogwork Wrestler, a card that I think pairs extremely well with Captain Storm. Blue for a 1/2. It's a gnome at common. It's an artifact creature, which is key here. And it has Flash. When it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-0 until end of turn. We've gone like 4 or 5 sets without one of these cards. I hate this type of card. It always gets me. I never remember it. This one even has 2 toughness. That is so like...
These are usually
this thing can
ones.
profitably eat a 3/1. Like, come on.
Yeah, remember that Seasoned Allowblade?
Yeah.
Leave that
oh
man
my
up.
God, this thing
Better
just
leave that man up.
This thing just dunks on that card. Anyway, if your opponent goes to block your Captain Storm, you flash this in. Even if your opponent had like a 3/3 in front of Captain Storm, all of a sudden your Storm is now a 3/3, their creature's now a 1/3. It just gets eaten, and you're left behind with a Cogwork Wrestler, which is a silly little gnome that likes wrestling, I guess. Cool. We've got Oaken Siren. 1 of the blue, 1/2, another artifact creature, Siren Pirate. Something we should notice about these count to both craft with artifacts and creatures for when it's relevant.
That's true. Yeah.
So a 2 mana 1/2 Siren Pirate at common. It is Flying and Vigilance. That's a pretty good set of stats as is. Flying and Vigilance pair pretty well with each other. And what pairs even better is that it has tap to add blue. Spend this mana only to cast an artifact spell or activate an ability of an artifact source. This is a cool card. First of all, just the body, like 2 mana 1/2 Flying Vigilance. Put a counter on this. Use like a map token or some other method. Then you got a 2/3 Flying Vigilance. It's also a mana dork. That's strong, right?
This can also pay to activate maps because that's an ability of an artifact source.
Yeah, so this is a lot of stuff for a little 2 mana body, plus, again, artifact creature. This seems to check a lot of boxes for what these blue decks want to do. And this mana that you're tapping, I guess the main way you'll be using this is helping you get to those 7 mana things, right? That our very first uncommon we looked at, the blue-white one, that 7 mana activated ability isn't quite as bad if you have one of these or a handful.
Yeah, and this is a common. And typically these cards in the last handful of sets, like these like really cheap mana dorks that are like, usually these are like use it only to cast instants or sorceries or whatever.
Yeah.
This one's usually those aren't very good. Like the last handful of sets, the one that was in WoW wasn't great. I didn't really ever bother playing it. They can be for like really tight vectors, like where that's all you want to do is cast instants and sorceries or whatever.
Yeah.
This one seems to have enough going on that even in decks that aren't that tight on the artifact thing, like you're just going to want these.
Mm-hmm. I have a feeling this is going to be good. I don't know. So
Yeah, I agree.
I'm getting a feeling. Next up, Spyglass Siren. 1 mana, 1/1 flying. It's a Siren Pirate at uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, create a map token. Cool. 1 mana, 1/1 flyer, make a map. Pairs well with what we've seen so far. Again, I mean, it's a pirate itself. So if you play this afterwards, after you have a Captain Storm out, this is 1 mana, 2/2 flyer, plus a map. Sick.
Yep.
Instant speed ways to make treasures pair well with Captain Storm. Ancestors A, we mentioned this one before. 1 under red, it gives a creature +2/0 and gives first strike, and it makes a treasure. It's especially good with Captain Storm while attacking. Just making that treasure at instant speed is going to be pretty sweet. And again, treasures, good to craft off with an artifact or splash stuff or just ramp, right? Goblin Tomb Raider. This is a funny one. It's no Goblin Guide, but it's pretty close. Red for a 1/2. Goblin Pirate says as long as you control an artifact, Goblin Tomb Raider gets +1/+0 and has haste. So hear me out. You play a Spyglass Siren on turn 1. Then on turn 2, you play a Goblin Tomb Raider and immediately swing for 3. And then you have 1 blue mana up for your Cogwork Wrestler. That's a pretty scary start, right?
Yeah, it seems pretty tight. At first I was like, yeah, you're just gonna have 1 blue floating and you're not gonna be able to do anything with it. But I guess the Cogwork Wrestler does change that up a little bit. Yeah,
you'll have the Wrestler and then you can sack the map or whatever. And then finally, just a bread and butter pirate here, Plundering Pirate. 2 and a red. It's a 3/2 Orc Pirate, a common. It says when it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. So 3 mana, 3/2, make a treasure. Kind of the perfect follow-up to Captain Storm. Just make her into a 3/3, you make a treasure, you start ramping. Now, a lot of decks will look at Goblin Tomb Raider and say, do I want a 1 mana, 1/2 that wants me to have an artifact? A Dinosaurs deck does not really care about this. Some black-red decks could care about this if it's like a treasure-based one. Like a red-white deck, maybe not. Hard to say. Plundering Pirate, I think this one is also pretty generic. I think this one might be slightly more sought after because it does make a treasure. And something like Red-Green Dinosaurs is looking to get up to 6 mana and like actually cast stuff there. So I think Plundering Pirate might, just as a 3 mana ETB treasure, be slightly better for more decks.
Oh yeah, I think Plundering Pirate's going to be just that generic sort of red card that kind of just it's happy to be played in every deck that can cast it, and it's not going to be the best card in your deck, but it's certainly not going to be the worst, and it's just a reasonable body that has an extra little token that you're going to make use of.
They couldn't have given us Sailor memes. They gave us this thing instead.
Next up, we have Kaparokti. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Kaparokti, Sunborn. 2 red-white for a 4/4 human soldier at uncommon. When Kaparokti Sunborn attacks, you may tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3.
Discover 3.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. It has to attack. And then you have to also tap 2 things, which can be any mix of artifacts or creatures. And then you get to, free cast anything 3 or less, basically. The first thing off the top of your deck, 3 or less. Or just put that in your hand, because why not? Cascade got better. And it's just a 4/4. Like, there's just a lot going on here that I think all adds up to a pretty solid card.
This fuels itself, where the more you discover 3, the more little dirtily junk things you're going to have laying around. And then you get to tap more stuff and discover 3 again, tap more stuff, discover 3 again. Now, you know I have a soapbox about tapping things in red-white instead of attacking with them. Because, you're supposed to attack with stuff in red-white. A certain Loxodon is on my short list. A certain Knight Errant is on my short list. I'm going to give this a chance, because I've been impressed with some of those cards in the past, and this is a unique take on the red-white vector. There's a lot of tapping things that are present within this set, and this seems to be the home for them. Uh, I mean, this vector wants you to put as many pieces of cardboard that you can tap onto the battlefield at once. Funny enough, this means you might not necessarily always want to sack things like treasures or maps because you might want to use them to fuel some of these. Let's look at some examples.
Right, yeah. Let's see what we have going on here. First up is Sunshot Militia. This is 1 red for a 1/3 at common. It's a human soldier, and it has an activated ability. Tap 2 untapped artifacts and/or creatures you control. Sunshot Militia deals 1 damage to each opponent. Activate only as a sorcery. This one feels pretty bad to me. Tapping 2 real things to deal 1 damage at sorcery speed feels pretty bad.
The old 2 mana 1/3. The defensive red card at 2 drop. So there's a couple options here. There's this tapping thing, and this obviously points the tapping thing in a non-aggressive direction. I mean, yeah, it's dealing damage to the opponent, but maybe it's trying to do sort of like a Boros and Strixhaven thing, where you build up a bunch of stuff over a long amount of time. You slowly just, ping them out. Maybe you chunk in for a couple bits of damage with something like Caverns of Sunborn here, who obviously, when this thing attacks, it's bad for your opponent, really brutal. You're getting in for 4 and then free casting something, and it gets messy from there. Maybe there's a second hidden vector within red-white that's just a beatdown deck, right? Red-white can have beatdown decks. It's good at that. But this tapping thing, it almost seems to be a response to the fact that the other colors will be setting up good defenses. Like, let's say your opponent plays the 1/1 Death Touch. You're kind of happy to have Sunshot Militia then, because you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to sit back and ping you to death. If you're going to take like 10 turns to dump your whole library into the graveyard, well, then I have time to set up a huge wide board. I'm pinging you consistently every turn. I'm, making tokens, putting counters on things, growing my board. Eventually, I might even be able to go wide enough that I can just swing out and kill you after I've already chipped you down to like 12 using stuff like Militia and Caparokti.
Yeah, that's true. And I think maybe, we read the signpost and think, okay, this card itself cares about attacking.
Yeah.
And we kind of extrapolate that and start to assume that the rest of the vector does. And that doesn't seem to be true here, even just off this first card. But let's keep going and see what else we have. Next up is Adaptive Gem Guard. This is 3 and a white for a 3/3 at common. It's a gnome artifact creature. Tap 2 untapped artifacts and/or creatures you control. Put a +1/+1 counter on Adaptive Gem Guard. Activate only as a sorcery.
Oh, that last line of text sucks.
That hurts. That hurts really bad. Yeah.
Do this on end step or mid combat, and it's sick. I guess I would prefer this to say you cannot activate this during combat. I know they don't really template stuff like that, but I think that would be much cooler. Being able to do this on end step and then swing in would be. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
No one's ever doing this.
No, and I was thinking the same thing about the last card, Sunshot Militia. Like, why is that limited to being a sorcery? I guess you can like pick stuff off, but you could do that anyway.
And that's to each opponent.
It's probably a commander thing, but I don't know. It just feels weird that that's not like, why are they putting these limitations on these things? Tapping 2 cards is a real cost. Like, that's not.
Yeah. And I guess you're assuming you're going to be able to put that in easily if you can make like. You obviously want things for this vector that create multiple pieces of cardboard, bodies that create other bodies, or a map token or a treasure token. That pirate would actually be pretty good here, right? That creates both at once.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, we have Attentive Sunscribe, 1 and a white for a 2/2 at common. It's a gnome artifact creature. Whenever it becomes tapped, scry 1. So this is a great card that you just like sit around. It's a 2 mana 2/2, so it can attack and like shore up the early game if you needed to, but then later you can just use it to get extra value off all your tap activation abilities. Seems decent. I'm still not sold on this vector, period, but
yeah, it's looking a little suspect. That activate as a sorcery clause is just
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you are going to be tapping your stuff down, though, I would like to get a little something extra for it, and this card does that. All right. Can I interest you in a Loxodon this time around? This one is Guardian of the Great Door. It's white for a 4/4 at uncommon. It has flying. 2 mana, 4/4 flyer. But as an additional cost to cast the spell, tap 4 untapped artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control. Come on, you have to like this one.
I do. I hate to admit it, but I do like this card a lot. Yeah, if only
It's just so flexible.
If only Vile was in this set, right? Vile this thing.
Yeah, I mean, the whole world was like, "Oh, great! Can't wait to Vile this bad boy in."
Yeah. Why doesn't this have vigilance so that then later when it attacks, you can tap it to pay for these other things like a Sarah Angel would have?
Because you could only do them at sorcery speed anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So, Guardian of the Great Dwarf, I mean, this is good. I mean, you'll play this in just about any white deck. I mean, this seems like a good rate. What I've been seeing people say is this is functionally a 6-mana card with Convoke and Improvise.
Right.
That makes it seem pretty appealing, especially when a lot of creatures are ETBing to make artifacts, or artifacts are ETBing to make creatures. Yeah, seems good to me.
Yeah, this opens like a meta door where I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I would rather them just add extra keywords to sets if it meant they put fewer words on cards.
Yeah.
Like, I know they don't like to do that, but like, it would just be so much easier for like established players to get through all these cards if it just said Convoke, Improvise, Flying on it.
Yeah, it would.
Anyway, next up we have Thousand Moons Infantry. This is 2 and a white for a human soldier at common. It's a 2/4, 3-mana 2/4. Untap Thousand Moons Infantry during each other player's untap step. There you go. That's a nice little common that you can tap at sorcery speed to then not have it be tapped when your opponent untaps. That's decent.
Oh, but so that's there so that when it untaps, then you can activate the ability again on their end step, right?
Nope, because it's sorcery speed, Ben.
Man, I want to love this deck. It's just not. I don't need to see it. I don't need to feel it out.
This is feeling a lot like red white in Strixhaven. Like it's like, ooh, you did something different with red white, but it's not good.
This is a good rate though. Like a 3-mana 2/4 that blanks. It blanks the Seasoned Hallowblade, right?
Right, but like out of everything we've seen so far, how does red white win games? The 4/4 flyer, that's it. The 1 mana, like the deal 1 damage thing isn't winning games. You're never putting counters on your gem guard, like
yeah.
And even if you do, they chump it to death. Like you know what I mean? Like this deck, I don't know how this vector wins.
Yeah. Again, I love it when a weird red white thing happens. I'm a big Boros defender. I will die on that hill.
If it works, I agree with you. I was really excited for Boros and Strixhaven, and it just didn't.
And you got rug
work.
pulled, yeah. So,
well, next up we have Volatile Wanderglyph. This is 1 red for a 2/2 at common. It's a golem artifact creature. Whenever Volatile Wanderglyph becomes tapped, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Sure. Okay. Give me a little rummage effect. Or loot. I can never remember which is which.
That's a rummager, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's nice.
You just sound so unenthused.
I am. None of these cards excite me. Also, I will say, of all the vectors we've looked at, this one has the largest number of commons that we've selected, which may mean it's more supported, but I also think that just means it has lower quality of cards overall.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of good white cards and red cards and in other vectors. I mean, this deck can still play them.
That's true.
Anything that makes multiple bodies on the field.
Yeah. Lastly, we have Gold Fury Strider. This is 4 and red for an artifact creature golem at uncommon. It's a 3/5. It has trample, and you can tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control to give target creature +2/+0 until end of turn. But of course, you can only do that as a sorcery.
And this thing can do itself. So you get a 5-mana 5/5 trample, but it prevents 2 other things from attacking with it.
Yeah. Also, funny little thing to note. This can tap itself to activate this, targeting itself. Don't do that.
Oh my god, the arena misclicks on this one are just going to be so bad.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
All right, we have one last vector to talk about here, and in order to talk about this vector, we need to talk about the lands that are present in this set. We've got a new thing. We've got caves, a new land subtype. Makes sense. They're going underground. They're digging, mining, crafting, Minecrafting, all that stuff. Could we get copyright struck for saying Minecraft? Is that?
We'll find out.
Let me read for you Hidden Nursery. It's part of a cycle of common caves. So Hidden Nursery enters the battlefield tapped. This one taps to add green. There's one for each color. Then it has pay 4 and a green, tap, sacrifice Hidden Nursery, discover 4, activate only as a sorcery. So you're in the mid to late game, you're running out of gas, your opponent is still going, and you're like, shoot, what do I do? Oh, my land has Cascade on it. Cascade, if you will.
Oh, no.
And you just get to cast something. I mean, you could hit up to a 4 drop off of this. You might hit a 1 or 2 drop off this, in which case you might maybe a little bummed. But this is a lot of value for a land to have.
Oh, yeah. No, that's very true. I don't love, and I'm being picky here. I'm being really picky, and I'm probably a little spoiled at this point because of the rates we've been getting lately. I don't love that these discover effects cost like a lot for the max value potential you could get out of it. Like this is 6 mana, potentially play a 4 drop, but also potentially just get a 1. You know, like I feel like the fact that there's variance to that should make these cheaper, not more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little bummed that they're more expensive. But this is a lot of value for a land to have, and cashing in a land late in a game where you maybe are out of gas or whatever to get anything playable is going to be good. So not knocking the card too hard. I'm just a little disappointed that these are that expensive.
Notably, this does put a permanent in the graveyard, right? It puts itself there. And a lot of caves actually have abilities that put themselves into the graveyard, such as Promising Vein. It's a colorless cave. It taps to add colorless mana. And it says 1 tap, sack Promising Vein, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. And that is also a common. So a nice little color fixer here.
Yeah, Ewild's got a little weird, like, I don't know what I want to say. This is better than Ewild's objectively because it costs mana to activate, but it's nice that it doesn't enter tapped.
Yeah, maybe Ewild's would have just been too good. I mean, yeah, this is just an untapped land.
Yeah.
There's also Captivating Cave. This is 5-color, multicolor cave that we got going on here at common. It taps to add colorless. You can pay 1, tap it to add 1 mana of any color, so sort of like a filter land. Then you can pay 4, tap, sack it, put 2 1/1 counters on target creature, activate as a sorcery. These tend to be junk. If you're playing like some kind of wacky multicolor deck and you desperately need to splash a card, yeah, you can play this, but I don't advise it. There's usually better ways. Promising Vein is probably better in just a vacuum than Captivating Cave. This is like you really didn't get there? Yeah, you can play this to splash your bomb, like 1 off-color pip type card. We've got Cavernous Maw. It's a colorless cave again. This one's an uncommon. You can pay 2. Cavernous Maw becomes a 3/3 elemental creature until end of turn. That's a really good rate for what they call a man land, like an animated land. Also, this is one of the only lands of this type that comes in untapped. These usually are like multicolored and do this. Usually the colorless ones come in untapped and are a little smaller, but this is a 3/3 with activate for 2. It says it's still a cave land. Activate only if the number of other caves you control plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard is 3 or greater. How often do you expect to be able to activate this in limited?
I mean, it's really going to depend how many caves you're comfortable running in your deck. You know, a lot of the high value ones like Hidden Nursery, that cycle are ETB tapped, so you don't want to run too many tap lands. The rest of them are colorless lands, and you don't want too many of those either. So there is going to be some tension between how many of them you're running. That said, this doesn't really give you the tension where, you know, you don't want to sack your lands because then you can't turn this on. They at least added that clause where it counts the ones in your graveyard. And 3 isn't a ton, but I don't know that I'm seeing reason to play more than 4 in a deck at any given time anyway. And if I'm only running 4, then this isn't turning into a land very often, into a creature very often.
Yeah, plus people are going to want these. Like Hidden Nursery is good just by itself. Yeah. You'll probably play 1 of each color in your deck, sort of like how we had in 1. Promising Vein is just solid fixing. A 2-color deck might even play this, depending on how the format goes. A 2-color deck that cares about the send would definitely play it. Black-green would always play Promising Vein.
Yep.
So the Maw, I don't know. Looking a little suspicious to me, multiple ways. Let's talk about a couple more caves and then talk about the cave vector itself. Forgotten Monument is a cave. Taps are colorless. It's uncommon. And it says other caves you control have tap, pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color. Okay, that's pretty cool. Turns all your caves into mana confluences. That's, I mean, a little dangerous and limited.
It is dangerous, but it is good. And if you're in the, like, if there's a really solid 5-color deck, it's built off of caves and Forgotten Monument, I expect.
Yeah. And this means your other ones still can tap for colorless. It just gives them the option. A lot of the cave cards that we'll see only have 1 single colored pip. So maybe the cave's mana base is like mostly these colorless lands. There's Pit of Offerings. It enters the battlefield tapped. This is another uncommon cave type land. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 3 target cards from graveyards. It can tap for colorless, or tap to add 1 mana of any of the exile cards' colors. Bojuka Bog? I mean, in a set with so many graveyard things, you probably always play this too, right? Or maybe you side it in against black-green. You would probably side it out against red-white.
Yeah, seems decent.
Volatile Fault. It's a cave. It's uncommon. You tap, add a colorless, and then you've got this usual effect. 1 tap, sack it, destroy non-basic land an opponent controls. That player can search the library for a basic, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle. Comes in untapped for them, and then you create a treasure token. So you don't get a land like these effects usually do. You just get a treasure instead. Kind of seems like a downgrade, but the fact that it's a cave is interesting. I guess the joke is that you're discovering some sort of hidden ruins, so you get a treasure. Now, the cave payoffs. There are several. Let's start with a pretty good removal spell, Calamitous Cave-In. 3 in a red, sorcery, uncommon. And all of these are going to be uncommons, by the way. There's not a single common on this list. So uncommon payoffs for caves. They do exist. Very distinct vector, and it's across all 5 colors. Calamitous Cave-In deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker, where X is the number of cave cards you control plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard. So this could be a 4 mana deal 3 to everything, deal 5 to everything, if you have enough of them.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's pretty good. Gates of Blaze was phenomenal.
Yeah.
This will be maybe not quite as good, but still quite good. And again, the fact that it hits them in the graveyard means you don't have to worry about like milling yourself away from your caves and making your Calamitous Cave-In worse. I do like that sort of safety net, but we'll see how this goes.
Bat Colony is 2 and a white. It's an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 bat creature token with flying for each mana from a cave spent to cast it. And then whenever a cave enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This one, out of all of them, I think feels the most like a trap.
Yeah, this is weird. And it doesn't like, I feel like it's trying to give you benefits no matter when you play it in the game. Like if all your caves are on the battlefield already, cool, you can get 3 bats. And then, like, if you don't have any when you play this, you can just put counters on all your stuff.
But that's not good.
I guess the joke is that you have like 3 caves or whatever, 2 or 3 caves, and then you make a couple bats, and then you play another cave, and you can buff the bats even if you didn't have other creatures. This just feels super slow, super wonky. I agree with you. Probably just a trap.
It's funny. If all of these are like this, these are all just kind of like bait for the world's worst constructed deck because they're clearly trying to support this. They made like 7 or 8 cave lands.
Yeah.
Gargantuan Leech. 7 and a black. It's a 5/5 leech. Costs 1 less to cast for each cave card you control and each cave card in your graveyard. All right, here's your what is it? Was it Gate Colossus?
Yeah, pretty much.
5/5 lifelink. That's massive. Like that's a stabilizer.
But again, like how many caves do you want to run to make this playable? Like it's an 8 mana spell. You probably don't want to be casting this for more than 6.
Yeah. At 6 it's passable, but 5 is when you actually like, okay, now that's fine. Right. So that means you need 3. You really need to be self-milling, right?
Yeah, or being able to draw. I mean, these aren't basics. You can't fetch them.
Yeah. Glimpse the Core. 1 of the green sorcery. Choose 1. Search your library for a basic forest card. Put on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Wow. Rampant growth. Back in standard. after all these years. Or return target cave card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I don't understand this.
Me neither. This just feels like a huge miss. Like, why can you not grab a basic forest or a cave?
Yeah. And isn't the whole point of caves that they don't care where they are? Like, all of these other things are templated such that it procs off of caves in your graveyard or on the battlefield. That may as well just say do nothing, right?
Well, I don't know. Here's where I can see that matters. And this is super niche, but I can see that mattering with exactly Pit of Offerings. Your opponent plays a Pit of Offerings while you have the Forgotten Monument. So your opponent, or no, not Pit of Offerings. I'm sorry, Volatile Fault. So your opponent blows up your Forgotten Monument, turns all your 5-color stuff off, and then you need to get it back. That's the only reason I could see this mattering.
Wow, that's something. Next is Scampering Surveyor. 4 mana for a 3/2 gnome. Sure. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land or a cave, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. There you go.
Okay, sure, but this is a 4 mana 3/2. Do I really need... Like, I've got my lands already.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't really... I mean, here's the thing. If this is the type of format where this card is good, then this will be like a Wingmantle Chaplain sort of effect. And if this is good, then this will be a cool format. If Caves is good, this format will be all-time goated. Like,
I don't know. I'm not buying it. I need to see it.
Next, Sinuous Benthesaur. 5 and a blue, 4/4 dinosaur. When it ETBs, look at the top X of your library, where X is the number of caves you control plus number in your library. Put 2 of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I was thinking about this effect.
That was caves you control plus the caves in your graveyard, not in your library.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this. If you control 0 caves, you just get nothing, right?
You get a 4/4 for 6.
Okay, so you get nothing. If you have 6 caves in your deck, this probably does something, right? If you have 1, you get to draw the top card of your library. I don't think you're ever in Limited going to get to look at like 4 or 5 cards, unless this is somehow one of the last cards in your library. I don't know.
What deck do you put this in? Like, the dinosaur deck doesn't want it. The caves deck, I guess wants this. A 6 mana 4/4. Does the caves
deck exist? That's the question.
Well, of course. But let's just for argument's sake, let's say it does. Like, you've got all the caves you could ever want. Do you even want this? I
6 mana 4/4 draw 2.
I guess you do.
I don't know. Spelunking is next. 3 mana, 2 and a green. It's an enchantment. When it ETBs, draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put a cave onto the battlefield this way, you gain 4 life. Then it says lands you control enter the battlefield untapped. Amulet Bloom players, try to contain yourselves. We know you're very excited about this for Modern or what have you. We know you love telling people how replacement effects work. I am not interested. I let Moto handle it. This card seems wildly unplayable and limited. Even in like a dedicated caves deck, you would want like 8 or 9 caves before this became an inclusion.
Well, the ironic thing is most of the caves entered untapped already.
Yeah, they do.
It's just the colored ones that don't really. So
it's a growth spiral, right? You get to draw a card, then you can put a land in, and if it happens to be a cave, you gain 4. But 3 mana, draw a card, put a land in. Well, your opponent plays like a 3 mana 3/3.
It's just bad.
Yeah.
Also, all of these payoffs are uncommons, as you mentioned already. How often does this deck? Yeah, I don't think this deck comes together ever. And when it does, check the bounty boards.
Oh yeah. We're gonna need a bounty for this one. I would like to see. I don't even know what I'd like to see. Just this deck working. I don't know what that means. We'll have to quantify that somehow.
Yeah, we'll figure it out before the set drops. But this is
10 caves. A 10 caves deck with 5+ payoffs. Payoffs being these cards, something like that.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Check the bounty boards channel in the Discord to get all the specifics.
All right, let's wrap up with some top comments here. We just have some predictions in no particular order for each color. These are ones that we think are just generically good. They just have solid vector lengths kind of agnostic of direction. Some of them have particular directions for which they'll be especially good, though. So first up, we've got Petrify. 1 in the white, aura, enchant artifact or creature. Enchanted permanent can attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. Upgraded pacifism, nice. Tinker's Tote. 2 in a white, artifact at common. All of a sudden, I'm double checking that these are all actually common. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens. You can pay a white, sack it, you gain 3 life. So This is an artifact that makes 2 more artifacts. 2 of them are creatures, so it's spreading the power across 2 bodies. It can put itself in the graveyard with an effect, or you could sack this and then maybe exile from the graveyard later. This seems to check so many boxes for white.
Never leave home without a gnome.
That's great. Oltec Cloud Guard is our last one here. 3 in a white. It's a 3/2 flyer. It's a human soldier at common. When it ETBs, create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. Solid body. Solid ETB effect. Looks good to me.
On to blue, we've got River Herald Scout. This is 1 in a blue for Merfolk Scout. Of course, at common. It's a 1/2. When it ETBs, it explores. Yep. Nice stats, assuming you can get that counter. Otherwise, lands are good. Next up, Oaken Siren. That's 1 in a blue for the 1/2 Siren Pirate artifact creature. This was the Flying Vigilance. Tap to add blue and only use it for artifact spells or abilities of artifact sources. I think this one's going to be a sleeper relative to other sets because, again, I think these are typically not very good. This one seems quite good. And then lastly, we have Song of Stupefaction. This is 1 in a blue for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature or vehicle. When Song of Stupefaction enters the battlefield, you may mill 2 cards. And then has Fathomless Descent. Enchanted permanent gets -X/-0, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So typically these are like -2 or -4/-0 effects. This one's bigger, helps enable itself, and can hit vehicles. So
there's a card in Innistrad that's like this. And from one of the recent sets, it was actually in Shadows over Innistrad Remastered. Basically the exact same text. It's a Doomblade, basically. It's as good as a blue Doomblade is going to get. Speaking of Doomblades, top black commons, we've got Join the Dead. 1 black, an instant. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. It also has Descend 4. That creature gets -10/-10 until end of turn instead if there are 4 or more permanents in your graveyard. 3 mana,
Nice.
Kill anything. This gets around indestructible even if that happens to come up. Really solid effect. Looks good. We've got Deadweight, mentioned a while back on the show today. Black for an aura enchantment. Enchanted creature gets -2/-2. We've seen a lot of pesky little flyers in this set, even just talking about a couple recently. I think Deadweight is just going to be a nice, clean answer. This can shrink something that's maybe getting in for clean attacks. This can kill anything with 2 or less toughness. And it puts a permanent into the graveyard for you when the creature dies. So, really good card. This is a bit of a hot one. Mephitic Draft. The 1 in the black artifact. When it ETBs or is put in the graveyard, you draw a card and lose 1 life. I smell this one cooking. This one's going to be good. Maybe I just smell the Kraft mac and cheese that I have on my stove top right now.
All right, on to red. We've got Itali's Favor. This is 2 in a red for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature you control. When Itali's Favor enters the battlefield, discover 3. And then enchanted creature gets +2/+1 and has trample. This is what I'm talking about with discover cards. It's 3 mana with upside, and it discovers into something up to the same mana value you're putting into it. Love to see it. Auras are tough, but the fact that this discovers gets you parity with cards if they blow you out or whatever. You're not going to get blown out, essentially. And the fact that you can tuck this into your hand if you can't cast it when you flip it means it's that much better. So this seems pretty decent. Next up is a Braid. This is 1 in a red for an instant at common, of course. Choose 1. Braid deals 3 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. In this set, this is just going to be phenomenal. That said, the destroy part is actually sort of a drawback in this set because you're putting cards into your opponent's graveyard. But a Braid's always been good in pretty much every format that it was put in, and I don't expect that to be different this time around. And then next up, we have Rumbling Rockslide. This is 3 in a red for sorcery. Rumbling Rockslide deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control.
It's a reprint. It was always good. I do have a question about Italia's favor. Didn't Italia get Phyrexianized?
Yep.
Whatever happened with that? Is Italia back and giving favors out now?
I have no idea.
All right, green. We've got Malamet Brawler up first. One of the green 2/2. Whenever it attacks, target attacking creature gains trample until end of turn. That can be itself, right? Pairs well with combat tricks. Wears even equipment well. There's a handful of those in this set. Wears counters really nicely. Just an all-around solid little attacker. We've got Poison Dart Frog. Look at this cutie. One in the green. It's a 1/1 with reach. It has tap to add 1 mana of any color, and it has pay 2. It gains Death Touch until end of turn. What a great little package. It does it all. I mean, it's a reach Death Touch frog that's a mana dork.
Yeah, I guess it enables itself too. Like you only actually have to keep 1 land up, which is going to get me so many times. My opponent's going to have 1 land up. They're going to have this thing untapped. I'm going to attack a flyer into it, and they're going to get me really good.
Yeah. And finally, we have Watley's Final Strike. 2 in a green instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+7 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. These effects are always solid. Whew, man. I just wanted to make one note real quick. We actually crushed our top white commons from last set. We actually nailed all 3. It was Hopeful Vigil, Cooped Up, and Archon's Glory. Maybe we'll save the rest of our results for a sign-off because not all of them were that good.
Yeah, green, for example, was the exact opposite.
You don't have to say that. Cut that out.
All right. Let's move on to Teferi Tibalt. We'll wrap this up because this has been a long episode. Ben, what's going on? How's your week been?
Oh, man. Well, this is actually a good week for teachers in New Jersey, at least. This is the New Jersey Teachers Convention week, which means all teachers in the state have off Thursday and Friday. And theoretically, it's so that they can go to Atlantic City to a big teachers conference and go do Atlantic City teachers conference stuff. Sometimes my students will ask me if I would ever attend, and I laugh. And I say, if you are given a day off from school, would you voluntarily think about school on that day? And their answer is always an immediate no, to which I'm usually responding, yeah, same. I usually have better stuff to do, whether it's writing a podcast episode or just jamming a bunch of weird standard decks or drafting or whatever. I mean, I do other hobbies too. Play guitar, read, watch TV. No, I'm not going to the conference. So that's been nice. I have a lot of cool stuff coming up this week. I'm going to a concert later. I mean, by this point, the streamer event has already happened, which is our first ever streamer event. So thank you to all those who tuned in. I'm sure it was a blast. I can't wait to see what stupid stuff I did. My Tivolt actually is a bit of a sad one. I can't make the pre-release this year. I hate the set, rather. I hate missing pre-release. It's always a bummer. I might try to pick up a pack, but just too busy this weekend to make it. I'm treating the streamer event sort of like a pre-release. And honestly, it is a pre-release, right? Not the pre-release that LRR does, though. This is a well, no, this is after that? I don't know. Is this a post-pre-release or a pre-release?
I don't know when they release that, so I'm not sure.
Me neither. What's up with you?
My Teferi's at Thanksgiving's around the corner. I'm getting pretty excited for that. Thanksgiving's a big deal with my family, and I love the food, minus the turkey usually. I do like the turkey, but I'd rather it be brisket or something else. Otherwise, the show updates have been getting some really awesome feedback. We really appreciate all of you who have reached out to say whether you loved it or hated it. Actually, I don't think anybody told us they didn't like the changes, so that's great. If you don't, we have a feedback channel in the Discord. Well, whether you do or not, we have a feedback channel in the Discord. We'd love to hear your feedback on all the different changes to the show over the last couple of weeks. And my Tibalt is that I've been really, really busy and kind of going through these like obnoxious waves of exhaustion and feeling very rested. Like one day I'll wake up and feel totally wiped all day long. And then the next day, even though I'm not going to bed particularly early, relatively speaking, I'll like wake up and feel great. And it's almost giving me whiplash. It's a little bit weird. I almost kind of wish I was just consistently exhausted over the like back and forth of like feeling like I finally got a reprieve and then the next day being awful. But that said, I think that does it for us this week. Thank you so much for listening. Do check out the Discord if you haven't already. Again, with this set, we're launching our bounty boards, so definitely jump in there. The bounty boards are basically achievements that you can earn as you play the game, and we will send you real prizes. So check that out. You're playing. If you're listening to this and you made it to this part of the show, you're playing the set anyway. So may as well get some extra packs out of it.
These are for you, right?
Also, if you'd like to support the show directly and help make those bounty boards even better, you can do so on Patreon at patreon.com/draftchaffpod. And you can find us online on social media on Twitter or X or whatever it's called at draftchaffpod, and the same for Reddit. Thanks, folks, and we'll catch you next week. Enjoy Ixalan.
All right, quick sign off. Not actually going to eat Kraft mac and cheese. Yesterday they had a potluck lunch at school. That's always nice, right? Teachers
and everybody brought Kraft mac and cheese, didn't they?
that would have been funny. I work in a pretty great school. We've got a lot of teachers from all over the world, and we get a pretty diverse range of food. So I look forward to this every year at this point. Last year I made a homemade apple cider. This year I made homemade pumpkin bread. Big fan of the fall aesthetics. But I've got some great leftovers. It's a bit of an eclectic mix. I have samosas, I have empanadas, and I have pancit. So like the vermicelli Filipino rice noodle dish. So a bit of a smattering of all over. But I do think it's funny that I'm eating two different types of dumpling.
I was about to say, you almost had oops all dumplings.
I was so close. I guess I would have needed maybe... These ones are Mexican empanadas. Maybe I could have gotten like Filipino empanadas. then I would have had a whole smattering.